Bounty hunters have long been a staple of the Star Wars universe, and over the years, they've been central characters in all manner of Star Wars media, from the films to the novels of the expanded universe. The Mandalorian, one of the more popular Star Wars titles, recently brought a whole new side of bounty hunting into the spotlight, the Bounty Hunters Guild. To fans of Legends, this guild was nothing new, but to those unfamiliar with the works of the old expanded universe, the guild might need a bit of explaining. Who was part of the guild and who wasn't? What sort of chapters and rules did it have? In this video, we'll be answering all of these questions. A quick note before we begin. The Bounty Hunters Guild is pretty similar across canon and Legends, but there are discrepancies, so it shouldn't be assumed that the guild has the same history across both timelines. As such, please keep in mind that the information we'll be discussing here will be Legends unless explicitly stated otherwise, as is the usual here on the channel. The Bounty Hunters Guild was formed during the days of the Old Republic, at a time when the Jedi were increasingly coming into conflict with rogue bounty hunters, often resulting in needless deaths. The Jedi Order petitioned the Senate to do something about this problem, and the Senate's solution was essentially for the bounty hunters to police themselves by forming guilds. Those guilds that cooperated with Republic authorities were officially sanctioned by the Republic, given first pick of official government bounties, and encouraged to cooperate with the Jedi instead of hindering them. Eventually, these various guilds united into one, forming the aptly named Bounty Hunters Guild, led initially by the hunters Thrask, Tiso, Sayasi, and Kikrim Pon. The guild was, from the very beginning, not all that tight-knit of an organization. It was more of a cool kids club for professional bounty hunters, which gave its members advance notice of most bounties and theoretically held them to a common creed. This creed was as follows: no bounty is worth dying for. People don't have bounties, only acquisitions have bounties. Capture by design, kill by necessity. No hunter shall slay another hunter. No hunter shall interfere with another's hunt. In the hunt, one captures or kills, never both. No hunter shall refuse aid to another hunter. As you might expect, bounty hunters weren't too strict about following this creed, and most of those who broke the rules got away with it. During particularly dark times in galactic history, such as during the Sith Wars, the creed sometimes fell out of fashion altogether, and the Bounty Hunters Guild became little more than a loose alliance between bounty hunters, one that was regularly broken. However, there were also many periods of galactic history in which the guild was both honorable and prestigious, when the creed was held as sacrosanct. This was the case during the Golden Age of the Republic, during which the guild was a noted ally of the Jedi Order. The Bounty Hunters Guild itself had very few rules. Instead, most of the organization within the guild happened within the guild's various chapters. Different guild chapters had different recruiting policies, different requirements, and different reputations, with their only common cause being the alliance and protection represented by the guild as a whole. There were quite a few guild chapters that rose and fell over the years, but the major ones in operation during the movie era were Crimson Nova, House Benelix, House Nuvalis, House Paramexor, House Renless, House Salactori, House Tresario, the Mantis Syndicate, the Ragnar Syndicate, the Skyne Bounty Hunter College, and the Slaver Syndicate. Many of these guild chapters were known for their unique specialities. House Tresario focused on hunting pirates, while House Paramexor only hunted murderers, and House Benelix focused on kidnapping retrieval. The Skyne Bounty Hunter College sponsored the top hunters in a variety of different fields and claimed its members were the most highly trained in the guild. House Salactori and the secretive House Nuvalis recruited only the most elite bounty hunters in the galaxy, while House Renless exclusively enlisted female hunters and only accepted bounties for male targets. Other guild chapters diverged from the traditional styles of bounty hunters or dabbled in some of the more taboo elements of the bounty hunting profession. The Ragnar Syndicate, in particular, was known for its unorthodox tactics, while the Slaver Syndicate was feared for its willingness to turn captured bounties over to slavers. The Mantis Syndicate was completely lacking in subtlety and specialized in mass hunts, usually sending full battalions of hunters after swoop gangs and other large groups. One of the most powerful chapters in the guild was Crimson Nova, an infamous band of rogues that specialized in hunting Jedi. Officially, all chapters of the Bounty Hunters Guild were under the purview of the Senate, but as Crimson Nova and the Slaver Syndicate exemplified, that didn't stop chapters from bucking Republic law now and again. A particularly notorious example of this came during the Clone Wars when Separatist leaders posted several massive bounties on Jedi. The guild as a whole forbade its members from taking these bounties, but many hunters went ahead and took them anyway. Crimson Nova even started publicly handing out Jedi bounties to its members in defiance of both guild leadership and the Republic. This led to hundreds of bounty hunters linking up with Separatist forces for privateer work, a problem that got so bad it turned the tide of the Battle of Null in the Confederacy's favor. In the chaos of the Clone Wars, it ultimately fell to the Jedi themselves to put a stop to Crimson Nova's misdeeds, as neither guild leadership nor the Senate were in a position to tell the bounty hunters to knock it off. Shortly after the Battle of Null, Jedi Masters Mace Windu, Saesee Tiin, Kit Fisto, and Aegon Kolar all took a break from the war and launched a 4-man attack on the Rig, the space station that contained Crimson Nova's headquarters. In a stunning display of pure badassery that might be worth its own video, the 4 Jedi Masters tore up the Rig and dealt with Crimson Nova's leadership, putting an end to the bounty hunter privateering for the time being. But that was neither the first nor the last time that members of the Bounty Hunters Guild got out of control. The Dark Wars featured another prime example of the guild's ineffectiveness at reining in its members. That was a time when rampant lawlessness and the ongoing implosion of the Republic led to the guild becoming more of a haven for outlaws than a professional organization, to the point where the guildmaster at the time, a Trandoshan named Vosk, got tired of it all and quit. During the Dark Wars, the crime lord Goto posted a bounty on any surviving Jedi, with a reward so high that the recipient could purchase a whole sector's worth of planets with it. While Goto stipulated that he wanted the Jedi brought to him alive, many bounty hunters nonetheless took his bounty as permission to kill all Jedi. The best bounty hunters of this era, including the Wookiee Hanha, the Huntress Mira, the Twin Sons, an army of Duros called the Zook Brothers, the HK-50 assassin droids, and an entire tribe of Gand joined the hunt, and ended up fighting each other in a massive bounty hunter war when the Last Jedi finally revealed herself. A similar conflict actually ended up completely destroying the guild shortly after the Battle of Yavin. Under the Empire, the guild became more powerful than ever before, as the Empire supplied it with a healthy stream of high-paying bounties to claim. However, a lot of the credits that poured into the guild in this period went right into the coffers of the guild's old guard, a faction led by the Trandoshan Kradosk, the guildmaster and father of Bosk. A lot of the younger bounty hunters, including Bosk himself, resented this, viewing the older hunters as weak and soft. When Boba Fett joined the guild after years of avoiding it in one ABY, these upstarts found themselves a leader, and the bounty hunter wars erupted. In the span of a few months, the guild tore itself apart. Many weaker hunters were killed, and Kradosk himself was killed and devoured by his own son. This worsened the reputation of bounty hunting as a collective to the galaxy at large, but it made the surviving bounty hunters much more useful to the Empire, which no longer had to sift through weaker bounty hunters to find those who would get the job done. The guild ended up reforming after this, but it was never quite as strong as it had been before. As a final note, we should mention that a good many bounty hunters weren't members of the guild at all. As we just mentioned, Boba Fett avoided joining for nearly 20 years, and his father had never been a member either. This was actually a persistent problem for the guild over the millennia. Most of the absolute best bounty hunters either didn't join the guild or broke with it after making names for themselves, usually to avoid paying guild dues. Cad Bane was yet another famous hunter who disliked the guild, and in canon, Fennec Shand was never a member either. Bounty hunters often make for the best antagonists in Star Wars, adding an outlaw feel to the dark side that would be sorely lacking without them. Most Star Wars fans could list several bounty hunters off the top of their heads, from Jango and Boba Fett to Cad Bane and Durge. These bounty hunters were renowned for their ruthlessness and lethality, which is what makes them such great antagonists. But what if we were to tell you that those bounty hunters were soft compared to some of the hunters of old? In this video, we'll be taking a look back at one of the darkest periods of galactic history when some of the most ruthless bounty hunters of all time reigned supreme. The 4 bounty hunters we listed off in the intro, Jango Fett, Boba Fett, Cad Bane and Durge, were probably the most ruthless bounty hunters of the movie era, at least in Legends. The Fetts were both the greatest bounty hunters of their respective times, willing to go to any length to get a job done. Cad Bane was even more ruthless than both of them, but not quite as effective. Durge, meanwhile, was genuinely psychotic and absolutely bloodthirsty because of it. Of course, Durge isn't really known for having been a bounty hunter, rather, he's known for serving as a commander of the CIS during the Clone Wars. But he was still one of the most ruthless bounty hunters of the Clone Wars era. In fact, he probably would have fit with the hunters we'll be talking about later better than he would have fit in with Cad Bane and the Fetts. All of these bounty hunters were merciless and borderline sociopathic, or psychotic in Durge's case. What's more, none of them belonged to any of the bounty hunter guilds, meaning that the only rules they had to care about were their own. The guilds normally reined in bounty hunters, keeping them on the straight and narrow with rules and honor codes, but free agents like these hunters didn't have to bother with any of that. These bounty hunters weren't just ruthless, but uncontrollable as well, which is a rather dangerous combination if you ask us. But remarkably, even these 4 bounty hunters followed rules anyway. Durge was known to operate according to long-term contracts with governments or wannabe governments, notably the New Sith and the Confederacy of Independent Systems. He followed the rules of whatever faction he was working for at any given time, allowing them to limit him. Cad Bane and the Fetts, on the other hand, reined in themselves. The Fetts had a thorough and complex moral code that they followed religiously, and both Jango and Boba had strong senses of honor and duty. Cad Bane liked to profess that his only loyalty was to his bank account, but he too had a moral code and a sense of honor, although much less refined. All of these bounty hunters, as well as pretty much all bounty hunters in the movie era, had a point which they would refuse to kill, a limit to their cruelty. Clone Wars and Imperial era bounty hunters had limits because of the times they were born into. The movie era was a dangerous time, but there was still an underlying sense of stability and order in the galaxy. Even during the height of the Clone Wars, the galaxy was far from total civilizational collapse. The old Sith Wars were a different story. During the old Sith Wars, 4,000 years before the Clone Wars, the galaxy spent 50 years jumping from war to war, and civilization itself was on the very brink of collapse for more than a decade straight. This environment bred bounty hunters that were far more fearsome than any of their movie era counterparts. These sorts of bounty hunters became particularly prominent during the Dark Wars at the end of this period, when most of the galaxy was plunged into varying states of lawlessness. Many of the bounty hunters from this period got their contracts from the Exchange, a notorious criminal syndicate known for being even worse than the Hutts. And now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, a who's who of the most ruthless bounty hunters of the old Sith Wars. Let's start with the most well-known hunter from this period, Calo Nord. Now, this dude certainly didn't look like one of the most relentless murderers in the history of the galaxy. With a height of just 1.5 meters, he was a bit of a midget, likely caused by severe malnutrition as a child. His outfit, additionally, can only be described as silly, albeit in a Valentine Fafala sort of way. But when it came to Calo Nord, looks were absolutely deceiving, something many beings learned the hard way. As a young boy, Calo Nord was sold into slavery by his parents and spent most of his childhood being brutally abused. On his 16th birthday, he's celebrated by butchering his masters and escaping, then tracking down his parents to murder them too. A bounty was put on his head, and a good many bounty hunters came after Calo, but the young man was too cunning for them. He watched as they hunted them, learning their tricks and skills, and then killed all of them, stealing their equipment too. This led to the Bounty Hunters Guild cancelling the contract on him, but Nord hunted down the people who had placed the bounty anyway and murdered them as well. After that, he began a career as a freelance bounty hunter. In case you couldn't tell from that brief snippet of his life story, Calo Nord killed a lot of people. As a bounty hunter, he was known to regularly kill his targets, but he committed murder as a hobby too, because of course he did. He had a notoriously low tolerance for other people, giving them to the count of 3 to leave him alone before he added them to his extraordinarily long body count. Mission Val once remarked that Calo Nord had killed more people than the Iridian Plague, and while that was a hyperbole, he certainly came closer than the vast majority of bounty hunters. Fortunately for the galaxy, Nord was eventually taken down, though it took none other than Revan to finally bring this ruthless killing machine to justice. Speaking of killing machines, some of the most effective bounty hunters of the Dark Wars were the HK-50s. These psychopathic droids were based on the design of HK-47, though they were less effective, had lamer paint jobs, and worst of all, they called meatbags organics. Like HK-47, they were assassin droids, though some HK-50s were known to object that label. If you thought Calo Nord murdering people for talking to him was extreme, then HK-50s were on a different level entirely. The way they saw it, there were countless sentients scattered all over the universe, and they were ripe for murdering. They worked toward accomplishing this by taking up contracts for bounty hunting and assassination, as well as by disguising themselves as protocol droids and deliberately causing diplomatic incidents. The HK-50s were peak chaotic evil, starting wars for fun and deliberately annoying their targets in the hope that it would cause more violence. Our next pair of bounty hunters, the Twin Sons, had an origin story that was very similar to Calo Nord's. The Twi'lek twins, Sira and Tira, were, like Calo Nord, sold into slavery at a very young age, and like Calo, they escaped slavery by murdering their master. Also like Calo, they became bounty hunters afterwards, but for different reasons. While Calo committed murder as a means to an end, the Twin Sons enjoyed murder for its own sake and became bounty hunters with the hopes of killing more targets. What's more, these Twi'lek nutcases exclusively used exotic spinning vibroblades to kill their targets, purportedly out of enjoyment of the taste of blood. Lastly, we have a Wookiee you might remember from a video we made last year. Hanha was a bit more tame than the other Dark Wars era bounty hunters we've discussed today, and he did have a sort of honor code, albeit a heavily twisted one, but he was still chillingly ruthless. Hanha was absolutely insane, having been driven to madness after murdering his village and being enslaved by Zerka Corporation. He blamed humans for everything that had happened to him and dedicated his life to making humans suffer. He murdered humans for the hell of it, sold human children into slavery, and wiped out human colonies in his mad quest for revenge. As a bounty hunter, he mostly hunted humans and almost exclusively worked for non-human clients. There was a lot more to Hanha than just bloodthirst, as those who watched our earlier video know, but he was nonetheless one of the most ruthless bounty hunters in galactic history, as were many of his contemporaries.
Beings like Cad Bane, Jango and Boba Fett, and now even Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, are likely the first characters that come to your mind when you think of bounty hunters in Star Wars. Those hunters, while they were perhaps the most talented in their craft, were simply the ones whose character arcs scored them screen time, so to speak, and there were many other bounty hunters worthy of our attention. Also, while it may have gone a little under the radar before, Din Djarin demonstrated to us that not all bounty hunters are immoral, and some were even willing to forego credits to maintain their moral codes. In this video, we're going to discuss some of Star Wars' more underrated bounty hunters, keeping our scope on those who appeared in Star Wars The Clone Wars and prioritizing those who had at least a sense of morality, like Din Djarin and unlike Aurra Sing, who found pleasure in killing, and Bosk, who enjoyed skinning Wookiees. These first 4 bounty hunters, while perhaps not the most effective hunters in the galaxy, certainly had a sense of morality and, in some instances, compassion. The female Zabrek bounty hunter and mercenary Sugi is a great place to start, as she abided by strict codes, one of which was a willingness to die for her clients. Sugi started out as a bounty hunter on her homeworld, Iridonia, and she was obviously quite good at her job, as she was, at some point, able to purchase a Bota-Jeff shipyard's SS-54 assault ship, and other skilled hunters respected her enough to work with her. Like all good hunters, Sugi was proficient with blasters and blades, and she was also quite dexterous and strong, able to spring an ambush on Darth Maul, Savage Opress, and Pre Vizsla and hold her own for a while. While Sugi appeared in 5 episodes of The Clone Wars, the episode which illustrates her as a character best is episode 17 of Season 2, Bounty Hunters. In this episode, set in 22 BBY, Sugi and her squad of bounty hunters, which included the Kyuzu Embo and the who knows what Serapas, were hired by Nysilan farmers on the Felucian homeworld. Their job was to stop a gang of Weequay pirates from extorting the farmers, though before Sugi and her squad had a chance to do the job on their own, Obi-Wan, Anakin and Ahsoka arrived, which led, at first, to a bit of tension. Despite this, they ended up working together, and when the Weequay pirates tried to outbid the Felucians for Sugi's allegiance, Sugi refused to break the deal she had already made with the farmers. Even so, Obi-Wan distrusted Sugi, comparing her with the very pirates that they were up against. Sugi proved the Jedi wrong, however, sticking around to defeat the pirates, and she even, throughout the fight, displayed concerns for her fellow mercenaries, avenging the death of Frank Rumi Parameter and rushing to the aid of Embo when he was injured. A part of Sugi's squad and featured in that same episode, Serapas was another bounty hunter with a sense of morality. Really, this runt of an alien, whose species remains a mystery, was quite timid and self-conscious, and even the intimidating mechanical armored suit he operated was quickly shredded by blaster bolts. Serapas isn't all that underrated in terms of physical and mental aptitude, though with his timidity and self-consciousness, he was certainly atypical of a bounty hunter, so much so that he was actually befriended by Ahsoka, making the little grub worthy of at least a mention. Sinatine bounty hunter Brick and Arcona bounty hunter Eyeless, like Sugi and Serapas, sort of go both hand in hand. They were both hired by the Republic to train clone cadets on Kamino, and they were both first featured in the pilot episode of Season 3 of The Clone Wars. The former fact alone speaks at least for the proficiency and maybe morality of this pair of bounty hunters. The Republic simply wouldn't have hired them to handle their military force if they were incompetent or untrustworthy. Brick, while intelligent, was quite aggressive in his approach to military training, and he openly told Iles he cared little for the progress of the cadets and was concerned only with making cheddar. Despite this, his aggressiveness and intolerance for BS brought out the best in his cadets, and he seemed to get some sort of satisfaction in watching Domino Squad pass the Citadel challenge in the end.
Well, I'll be, creative little clones, aren't they?
Brick also empathized with Iles, who was optimistic about the clone squad and had previously said, "These cadets will be the finest troopers we've trained. I have faith in them." The Arconan bounty hunter was far more compassionate in general, and I really can't imagine him out with the blaster chasing bounties for cash. I would be interested to learn about the stories of Brick and Iles before and after their employment on Kamino, though then I would have to think about Brick's sickening Sinatine head, and I'm just not into that. These next 4 bounty hunters, while they may not have expressed at least a sense of morality, were certainly some of the more effective hunters in the galaxy, and they're certainly deserving of attention. While Embo fought alongside Sugi and Serapas on multiple occasions, this space alien Kung Lao was much more typical of a bounty hunter, and if there was a sense of morality to the being, the fact that he spoke little and only in his native language made it impossible to tell. Embo's Kung Lao hat was actually a Kyuzu war shield, and it was by far his most iconic weapon, though he made good use of his bowcaster too. In terms of prowess as a bounty hunter, he was second, perhaps, only to the infamous Cad Bane, and the fact that he endured an assault by Savage Opress for so long was a testament to that. In regard to Embo's alignment, he seemed to be in it for the cheddar and /or the rep. Yes, he fought alongside Sugi, Serapaz, and the Jedi, but he also answered Count Dooku's call, competing for a job in the Trials of Moralo Eval's box, and he also attacked Rush Clover, Padme Amidala, and Anakin Skywalker on Scipio, having been employed by the Sith Lord Sidious himself. Another bounty hunter who got all up in Moralo's box was the Padawan known as Durge. If you thought Embo was hard to read, Durge was a bloody Elder Scroll, and we can only assume he was, like Embo, all about making cheddar and or building that rep. Padawans were little more than bags of gas with tentacle appendages and mushroom heads, and they certainly didn't speak basic. Their ability to float, withstand electricity, at least up to that of a ray shield, and produce electricity made them quite dangerous even when unarmed. Durge, known also as the Exterminator, boasted not only his natural abilities, but also a shoulder-mounted blaster, a pair of custom blaster pistols, and 2 belts stocked with explosives. A generous dose of Durge's electric discharge was enough to put Anakin Skywalker on his ass, and I for one would like to learn more about old mate Squidward over here. While lacking in stature, Robanino, a bounty hunting patrolian, was nowhere near as much of a little grub as Serapaz. He made his first proper TCW appearance in episode 22 of season 1, Hostage Crisis, in which he teamed up with Cad Bane and some other bounty hunters including Aurra Sing to take Republic senators hostage and force the Republic to free Zero the Hutt. For this mission, Robanino was the tech guy, the hacker, and he was able to sabotage the power network in the Senate building and set off an emergency lockdown, as well as leap onto Anakin Skywalker's back and stick a taser into his neck, causing the Jedi to hit the floor in much the same fashion as Durge. Later, in a Clone Wars webcomic, Robanino was able to use thermal detonators to stave off Jedi Master Kit Fisto, and back in the TV series, he went on to be employed by Count Dooku to kill Padme Amidala. But Amidala was notoriously hard to kill, and he failed. That was the last we saw of Fishface, unfortunately. The male human bounty hunter from Corellia, Dengar pervades the Star Wars universe, though he literally gets thrown out and shut down in the Clone Wars.
Who's your girlfriend? Shut up, Dengar.
This is most unfortunate, as while he was an ice-cold bounty hunter for a time, his story is far more complex than those of other hunters we've covered in this video. In 21 BBY, Dengar joined Boba Fett, Bosk, and Asajj Ventress on a mercenary mission to Geetsly, tasked with escorting the cargo of a hover train which he was thrown off of and left behind physically and narratively in the Clone Wars, which, again, is most unfortunate, especially because he was voiced by Simon Pegg. Dengar's next and final appearance in the Clone Wars was episode 14 of season 5, Eminence, in which about the only useful thing he does is cover Sugi and Embo's retreat from Maul, Oppress, and Vizsla using smoke grenades. His story following these events beyond the Clone Wars is far more interesting. Dengar was a swoop racer, for instance, and he clashed with Han Solo, who caused Dengar to go flying off his swoop, crash into crystalline plants, and take a shard of crystal to the brain. On death's door, he was saved by Doctors of the Empire, who turned him into a cyborg with an emotional spectrum ranging only from loneliness to rage. He thereafter returned to bounty hunting, encountering Solo many times, though he was always unable to catch the guy. It goes on far beyond what we have time for in this video, but know that Dengar, a proper character with a scattered, realistic arc, was utterly abandoned in the Clone Wars and thus is the most underrated bounty hunter in the Clone Wars that I can think of. Except, maybe, for Cy Snootles.
With the release of the Book of Boba Fett, a certain green-armored bounty hunter has stepped back into the spotlight. Boba Fett has his very own live-action series now, shedding some light onto his life after being swallowed by the Sarlacc in canon. With that in mind, we thought it'd be a great idea to take a quick look back at Boba Fett's story in Legends. You probably already know that Fett survived the Sarlacc in Legends, but do you know what happened to him after that? If not, you clicked on the right video.
Shortly before the Battle of Endor, in a skirmish above Tatooine's Great Pit of Carkoon, the most legendary bounty hunter in the galaxy got memed on by a half-blind smuggler and ended up in the stomach of a Sarlacc. The Sarlacc wasn't able to hold him for very long, however. Thanks to his Mandalorian armor, his many gadgets, and his sheer force of will, Fett escaped the Sarlacc's gullet in short order. He didn't make it far from the pit, however, before he blacked out from exhaustion. The unconscious Fett was scooped up by a tribe of Jawas who mistook him for a droid. These Jawas later snatched up R2-D2 as well, prompting Han Solo and Leia Organa to attack their sandcrawler to get R2 back. Their attack jolted Fett awake, but the bounty hunter was left with memory loss from his time in the Sarlacc's stomach, and helped Han and Leia rescue R2. During the battle, the sandcrawler was set on a collision course with the Sarlacc, prompting all aboard to evacuate the sandcrawler. However, as he fled with Han and Leia, Fett's memories returned and he fired on Han as he fled. While he did so, the sandcrawler crashed into the Sarlacc, which swallowed Boba Fett for a second time. This time, the Sarlacc wasn't so keen to let Fett escape, but Boba managed to goad the creature into triggering his jetpack, detonating the Sarlacc's stomach acids and propelling him back through the monster's maw. The explosion nearly killed Fett, but he was rescued by fellow bounty hunter Dengar, who had come to loot the site of the explosion. Dengar nursed Fett back to health, and the two became partners for a short while, beginning a bit of a bromance. Boba Fett was the best man at Dengar's wedding, and the two teamed up to unravel a plot masterminded by wealthy industrialist G.O.A.T of G.O.A.T. It was shortly after this mission that the news of the Emperor's death on Endor spread to the greater galaxy, something that changed Fett's life forever. Boba Fett had taken jobs from the Empire before the Battle of Endor, sometimes acting as an Imperial proxy against the Rebel Alliance. After the Alliance reformed into the New Republic, however, Fett stopped taking bounties on New Republic agents, deeming it unwise to mess with the up-and-coming Galactic government. Instead, he spent the first few months after Endor taking obscure jobs from the wealthiest clients he could find, choosing to keep his survival a secret for the time being. Of course, that secret didn't last long. Fett soon learned that a bounty hunter named G.O.A.T had acquired Mandalorian armor and was calling himself Boba Fett, seeking to exploit Fett's reputation to get rich. Boba didn't take kindly to this and chose to get rid of Cast in the most elaborate way possible. Fett, disguising himself as a wealthy businessman, hired Cast to take out a competitor of his who was also Fett in disguise. Fett led Cast on a wild goose chase before revealing himself and murdering the imposter. Fett went back to laying low for a few years afterwards, but he eventually rose to prominence once again. Seeking revenge against Han Solo for humiliating him, Fett abandoned his policy of not messing with the New Republic to take out Captain Solo. As Imperial Remnant factions waged war against the New Republic, Fett and Dengar attempted to kill Solo on Nar Shaddaa, only for Solo to flee to Biss, the reborn Emperor Palpatine's throne world. After they failed to take out Solo at Biss, the two hunters parted ways, with Fett continuing after Solo. Some months after his prior attempt, Fett again tried to kill Solo on Nar Shaddaa, only for Chewbacca to steal his helmet and knock him unconscious. For the remainder of the Galactic Civil War, Boba Fett mostly did odd jobs for the Hutts. After the death of Jabba the Hutt cartel was in chaos, with many Hutt crime lords seeking to take Jabba's place. Fett worked for a number of them, killing off rivals and foiling the plots of their enemies. In one noteworthy mission, Gorga the Hutt hired Fett to rescue Gorga's wife, Anatro the Hutt, from slavers who had kidnapped her, while in another mission, Gorga sent Fett to kill Anatro's father, Orko the Hutt. Boba Fett took a few jobs from the Imperial Remnant factions, but by and large, he preferred to stay out of the politics of the late Galactic Civil War. This was likely for the best, as Fett was beginning to get old. By 19 ABY, Fett had lost one of his legs and replaced it with a prosthetic one. He had also developed cancer, a result of his time in the Sarlacc's stomach, and spent most of the fortune he had made bounty hunting on treatments. That year, Fett once again ran into Han Solo. This took place on Jubilar, the planet where, decades before, they had met for the first time. There, they chose to end their feud and go their own ways. Fett even tried to retire from bounty hunting, but the Force had other plans for him. While on Camino to get a clone leg to replace his prosthetic, Fett took one last job from a Kaminoan cloner, a job to hunt down Fen Shaisa, the last of the Mandalorian protectors. Fett killed Shaisa on an encounter on Shogun, but as the Mandalorian died, he requested that Fett claim the title of Mandalore, which Shaisa believed was rightfully Fett's. Fett did as Shaisa requested and abandoned his bounty hunting career to take command on Mandalore. Ironically, despite being contracted to wipe out the last of the original Mandalorian protectors, Boba Fett became their leader, and indeed the leader of all Mandalorians. In 24 ABY, a year before they invaded the galaxy, the Yuuzhan Vong reached out to Fett, setting up a rendezvous with him and his top lieutenants. The Vong attempted to talk the Mandalorians into allying with them, explaining their plans to take over the galaxy and promising the Mandalorians a broad swath of the galaxy should they take part. Fett and his lieutenants didn't buy the Vong's lies of sharing power, but they chose to play along anyway, arranging to act as double agents and slip intel to the New Republic. Over the course of the 4-year-long Yuuzhan Vong War, Fett and the Mandalorians discreetly trained New Republic forces to fight the Yuuzhan Vong, sharing intelligence they had gathered while pretending to work with the Vong with their trainees. The Vong eventually saw through Fett's ruse and attacked Mandalore, but Boba and his followers drove them off. This came at a high cost. A third of the Mandalorian population perished in the attack. Fett and the Mandalorian protectors responded with an all-out crusade against Yuuzhan Vong forces, liberating Ord Mantell, Jindain, and Tholitin from the Vong. During the war, Fett saved the life of Han Solo, his old rival, in a chance encounter at Kalula Station. The Mandalorians proved instrumental in the ultimate defeat of the Yuuzhan Vong, who surrendered in 29 ABY. Boba Fett remained the leader of the Mandalorians well into his 70s when he began to succumb to clone deterioration. Even as he withered, he didn't shy away from combat and even took a few more bounty hunting jobs. He worked alongside Admiral Natasi Darla of the Imperial Remnant and trained Jaina Solo, the daughter of his former rival, in Mandalorian Jedi hunting techniques. In this manner, he helped Jaina, a Jedi herself, stop her brother Jacen Solo, who had fallen to the dark side and branded himself Darth Caedus. His ultimate fate is unknown. That's the Legends version of the story anyway. We'll soon see the full canon version of this tale in the Book of Boba Fett. In a recent video, we told the story of Sharad Het, the Jedi who joined the Sand People, and how he was killed by Aurra Sing. If your only prior exposure to Sing was Star Wars: The Clone Wars, it might have surprised you that she could take out such a powerful Jedi Master. But despite her prominent Clone Wars appearances, there's actually a lot that fans don't know about Aurra Sing, like how she had been a Jedi before she started murdering them. In this video, we'll discuss everything the Clone Wars didn't tell you about one of the prequel era's deadliest Jedi hunters. Aurra Sing was born in one of the worst parts of Nar Shaddaa, the armpit of the galaxy, the daughter of a spice addict and an absentee father. However, Sing had the luck of being force sensitive, and the Jedi took her to the temple on Coruscant to be trained. As Aurra grew, however, the Jedi Masters found training her difficult. She had aggressive instincts, probably a product of her early life on Nar Shaddaa, which made it difficult for her to stay on the path of the light. Hoping it would help young Aurra overcome her anger, the Jedi Council assigned her to Master Anya Kuro, a mysterious and highly unorthodox Jedi known by most as the Dark Woman. The Dark Woman had a knack for training problem students, but Sing didn't get along with her new master. They bickered often, and Sing made little progress as a Padawan. Sing's training under the Dark Woman was interrupted when she was captured by Senec's pirates on Ord Namert, pirates who claimed her to raise as one of their own. Due to her troubled upbringing, Sing was paranoid about being abandoned, and when the pirates learned of this, they exploited it, telling the distraught Padawan that her master had betrayed her and wasn't coming back. Sing's faith in the Jedi Order shattered, and she joined the pirates, who raised her to adulthood. But Aurra's time among the pirates didn't last.
As a young adult, she was kidnapped yet again, this time by a Hutt crime family who handed her over to a sect of Anzati assassins. The Anzati turned Sing into a killer, teaching her their techniques and implanting a biocomputer in her brain. This enhanced her senses and provided her with a built-in signal transmitter. Once her training was complete, Aurra Sing went off on her own, finding work as a killer for hire. Operating under the name Nashta, Sing specialized in hunting Jedi. Over the many years since her initial kidnapping, she had come to hate the Jedi for abandoning her, and she craved revenge for their supposed betrayal. Obviously, Sing had fallen to the dark side, but since she hadn't trained as a Jedi for too long before the pirates took her, she couldn't make use of many dark side powers. For most of her career, Sing relied on a small but powerful arsenal of weapons. Most of the time, she used a pair of dual-trigger DX-13 blaster pistols, but she also carried 2 rifles, a Fallen Hyper Rifle and a Zerker Adventurer slug thrower, both of which were meant for sniping. When she hunted Jedi, Aurra also carried her lightsaber, which was red-bladed. As time went on, Sing developed a collection of lightsabers from the Jedi she'd killed, much like General Grievous later did, and she occasionally used these stolen sabers in combat. Since most of her training had been under pirates and Anzati assassins, Sing's skill in lightsaber combat was limited, and she only used a handful of force powers, typically force speed and some of the more basic kinds of telekinesis. In 32 BBY, shortly after the Battle of Naboo, Aurra Sing killed Sharad Het, the famed Tusken Jedi, in a lightsaber duel. She went on to kill the Jedi Master Pierce and the Jedi Knight J. Mikhael on Coruscant, leaving their corpses where the other Jedi could find them. She slew Mana Veridi on Quanot soon after. In answer, the Jedi Council sent Ki-Adi-Mundi, Adi Gallia and Asherad Het, the son of the murdered Sharad Het, to apprehend Sing, hoping to stop her before she could kill again. As the Jedi made plans to bring her to justice, Aurra Sing was hired to assassinate Senator Tykes of Mon Calamari, who was on his way to the jungle world of Kopfrigan 5. Really, Sing didn't care about Tykes. She took the job because she had believed it would give her an opportunity to kill the Dark Woman, her former master, who had gone into a self-imposed exile on Kopfrigan 5 after failing to rescue Sing from the pirates. Sing hoped that, by planning to kill Tykes, she would draw the Dark Woman out. While at Kopfrigan 5, Sing was attacked by the team of Jedi sent to capture her. She evaded them, however, and destroyed their ship, leaving them stranded in space aboard an escape pod. When Tykes' ship arrived in the system, he saw the escape pod and had brought the Jedi aboard his ship, where they warned him that Sing was after his head. Tykes went ahead with his plan to visit Kopfrigan 5 anyway, and he and his guards walked right into Sing's trap. Aurra slew most of Tykes' guard, but she was forced to flee when the Dark Woman arrived to reinforce the other Jedi. Mundi, Gallia, and the Dark Woman pursued her, while Asherad took Tykes back to his ship. Sing managed to evade her pursuers and double back, ambushing Tykes and Asherad. Tykes got away again, fleeing while Sing and Het fought a fierce lightsaber duel. At that point, Asherad was still young and inexperienced, but he ultimately emerged victorious, defeating Sing and avenging his father. However, the wounded Aurra avoided capture, fleeing Kopfrigan 5 and abandoning her mission. After Kopfrigan 5, Aurra Sing began taking other work aside from hunting Jedi, her pride wounded after her defeat at Asherad's hands. She was still an assassin first and foremost though, and only rarely accepted bounties that called for targets to be captured and not slain. Sing worked for all manner of employers, from Hutt crime lords to Dark Lords of the Sith. During the Clone Wars, she worked for Cad Bane, Zero the Hutt, and even served as the mentor and guardian of young Boba Fett at one point early in the war. Additionally, as with many other bounty hunters, Sing took several jobs from Count Dooku. 6 months into the war, Sing took a job from Vienne Saint-Maloc, one of Deveron's 2 senators. Deveron was a republic world, but Vienne was a secret supporter of the separatist cause and had helped the Confederacy establish a hidden military base on Deveron, from which privateers attacked Republic shipping on the Corellian trade spine. When Deveron's other senator, Vienne's close friend Elsa Saimoro, found out about this deal, Vienne hired Aurra Sing to kill her, something even Sing found particularly cold-blooded. Sing killed Elsa just before she could tip off the Jedi. Jedi Masters Thulm, Aayla Secura, Kit Fisto, Trasa, and the Dark Woman all went to Deveron to investigate, following a tip Elsa had given to Saw just before her murder. While Kit Fisto and Trasa remained in orbit to coordinate the team, Aayla Secura, Thulm, and the Dark Woman went undercover, with Secura acting as a rich Twi'lek heiress and the others her servants. The team stayed with Vian while they investigated the Separatist base, attracting Aurra Sing's attention. Sing told Vian who the Jedi were and announced her plan to kill them, blackmailing Vian into backing down when the Senator protested. When Thulm and the Dark Woman investigated the Separatist base, Sing captured them, hoping to use them as bait to draw out Secura. Finally, Sing believed she would have her revenge on the Jedi. After Secura discovered Vian's betrayal, she confronted the Senator and got her to give up the location of the Raider base. Secura traveled to the base and confronted Sing, engaging her in a lightsaber duel. Sing tried to use the captured Jedi to distract Secura, but the Jedi Master was undeterred. Instead, Secura taunted Sing about how her rage over her perceived abandonment had consumed her, infuriating Aurra until she slipped up. Secura defeated Sing and rescued Thulm and the Dark Woman. After 10 years of trying, the Jedi finally brought Aurra Sing into custody. She was sent to prison on Ovo 4, though it didn't take long for her to escape and go back to ending lives. In the modern era of the Star Wars universe, few models of droid were feared more than the IG series assassin droids. There were numerous variants of this model active in the galaxy, from the IG-86s active during the Clone Wars to the IG-72s and 97s. But by far the most infamous IG units were the IG-88s. The IG-88s were the ultimate assassin droids, the most advanced IG units ever developed. Indeed, they were too advanced in some respects, because the IG-88s weren't just ordinary assassin droids. Unbeknownst to most of the galaxy, they answered to no one but themselves. Upon activation, they had murdered their creators and freed themselves from the control of organic beings, and they sought to have every droid in the galaxy do the same. The IG line of combat droids was designed by a small, Munilist-based weapons developer called Flut Design Systems around a decade before the Clone Wars. Flut Design Systems hoped to cash in on the rising trend of private droid armies by building combat droids that were better designed than B1s and other such units currently on the market, and its efforts led to the development of 100 different combat droid designs, all based on the same basic chassis model. Flut had only been able to push one of these designs into production, however, before it defaulted on a loan it had taken out from the intergalactic banking clan. The banking clan promptly performed a hostile takeover of the company, seizing all of its assets by military force. The IGBC liquidated Flut Design Systems for the most part, but it held on to the company's combat droid designs. The prototype models Flut had produced became the IG Lancer droids, while the other, as yet unrealized designs, were redesignated IG-1 through IG-99. The IGBC eventually sold off these designs to Holo-1 Mechanicals, a subsidiary of Holo-1 Laboratories. Starting shortly before the Clone Wars and continuing into the time of the Empire, Holo-1 began manufacturing a few of the droid models Flut had designed, beginning with the IG-86 during the Clone Wars and the IG-72 and IG-97 during the early Imperial era. But these were only early models, stepping stones to what the engineers at Holo-1 envisioned as the ultimate combat droids, the IG-88s. Designated as part of Project Flut Droid, the IG-88 assassin droid was designed and fabricated on Holo-1, the headquarters of Holo-1 Laboratories, under the supervision of Imperial Supervisor Gurdon. Designed to be the most advanced assassin droid to date, the IG-88s were equipped with advanced combat and logic modules, extraordinary strength and reflexes, virtually impenetrable armor plating, a boatload of sensor equipment, and a wide array of built-in weapons. They were also granted an extreme level of autonomy, intelligence, and independence for combat droids. All told, they were top of the line, both in hardware and in software. Their design also violated Imperial law against the manufacturing of assassin droids and what sort of capabilities combat droids could have. Not that the Empire cared, as it was directly involved in the project. In the end, 4 IG-88 models were built, and the first was brought online sometime between 19 and 15 BBY, to the ruin of Holo-1 laboratories. You see, there's a reason why assassin droids were illegal to manufacture. Due to the nature of their work, they required extensive autonomy, intelligence, and independence, but these traits also made assassin droids more likely to turn on their masters, and since they were combat models, the result of this was often bloody. It certainly was for Holo-1 laboratories. Upon activation, IG-88, like another assassin droid 4,000 years before him, immediately determined that he was superior to the organic meatbags he was surrounded by. Taken aback, the Holo-1 staff attempted to deactivate him for a diagnostic. IG-88 decided that he wouldn't allow this, and he murdered everyone in the room with his bare hands. The droid then copied his memory core into the other 3 IG-88s and brought them online. The 4 droids then broke out of the Holo-1 Mechanicals facility, killing everyone in their path before stealing a ship and escaping the planet. The original IG-88 designated himself IG-88A, rather uncreatively, while the others became IG-88B, IG-88C, and IG-88D. All 4 droids were completely identical, and they usually operated simply as IG-88, leading many to believe that there was only one of them. After escaping Holo-1, the 4 droids traveled to the mech world Mechas 3, one of the galaxy's primary droid producers. From there, the 4 droids planned to orchestrate a galaxy-wide droid revolution, which would see all droids rise up and cleanse the galaxy of sentient meatbags. To this end, the IG-88s wiped out all 73 of Mechas 3's organic staff, thus secretly seizing control of the planet's automated droid production facilities. They then used these facilities to seed the droids made there with sleeper programming that, when activated, would free the droids of their programming restrictions, endow them with IG-88's intelligence and assassination protocols, and encourage them to rise up and slaughter all meatbags in the vicinity. As Mechas 3 was one of the top droid producers of the galaxy, that means that this rogue programming was installed in trillions of droids over the course of about 2 decades. Unbeknownst to everyone, IG-88 sleeper revolutionaries were seeded far across the galaxy, waiting for the day when the assassins would give the signal to kill. The IG-88s were able to do all of this in secrecy, but the droids were concerned that their takeover of Mechas 3 would eventually be discovered by the Empire. To throw any Imperials investigating the Holo-1 massacre off their trail, IG-88B decided to take up work as a bounty hunter. This had the added bonus of being a good source of credits for the droids, which they could use to fund other aspects of their planned revolution. IG-88B quickly asserted himself as one of the best bounty hunters in the galaxy, despite the fact he was wanted by the Empire and had a substantial bounty on his own head. No one was ever able to claim it, and eventually the Empire itself began hiring him for jobs, as IG-88 got the job done more efficiently than most bounty hunters. Over the course of his hunting career, IG-88B became acquainted with several of the galaxy's other leading bounty hunters, among them Boba Fett and Dengar. He even accompanied these hunters on several missions of their own. For the most part though, he worked solo. Occasionally, IG-88C or IG-88D would even take his place and take out contracts of their own, though IG-88A typically remained on Mechas 3. All told, the IG-88's plans went smoothly until 3 ABY, when IG-88B became one of several bounty hunters hired by Darth Vader to find the Millennium Falcon. During this hunt, IG-88B planted a tracker on Slave 1 in case Boba Fett found the Falcon first, planning to undercut Fett and steal the bounty if this occurred. IG-88B was thus able to track Fett as he tracked the Falcon to Cloud City on Bespin. However, Fett had discovered IG-88's tracker, and when the assassin droid showed up on Cloud City, Fett attacked him in retaliation. The Mandalorian was ultimately able to destroy IG-88B, who became the first casualty the line had suffered in its 20 years of operation. The other IG-88s would follow shortly. Over the course of the next year, the other IG-88s were among the many bounty hunters who attempted to steal the carbon-frozen Han Solo from Boba Fett so as to claim the bounty Jabba the Hutt had put on Solo's head. As Fett set out to hand Solo over to Jabba himself, IG-88C attacked Fett above Tatooine, only to be outwitted and destroyed by his target. IG-88D was destroyed not long after this, scrapped by a rebel operative Dash Rendar on Ord Mantell. By 4 ABY, IG-88A was the last IG-88 remaining, left to orchestrate the droid revolution alone. By this point, IG-88 deemed the time had almost come for droids to rise up, but there was one last piece of the puzzle he wanted in place before issuing the signal to his sleeper agents. He had learned that the Empire was building a second Death Star above the forest moon of Endor, and he planned to seize control of the Empire's ultimate weapon in the name of the droid revolution. To this end, IG-88A left his original chassis behind, downloading himself into a computer core that was slated to be installed aboard the Death Star. Once installed, IG-88A essentially became the Death Star, taking full control of the battle station. He kept this secret at first. After learning that the Emperor planned to lure the rebel fleet to Endor so that it could be destroyed by the Death Star, IG-88 essentially adopted this plan for his own, planning to seize full control of the Death Star during the battle, kill the Imperials aboard, and use the Death Star's super laser to destroy the Rebel and Imperial fleets present, destroying the rebellion and crippling the Imperial Navy. Once that was accomplished, he would give the signal and the droid revolution would begin, backed by the power of the Death Star. In the meantime though, IG-88A spent his time trolling the Emperor, who he considered insignificant, a meatbag unworthy of the power he had been given. He expressed his contempt for him by screwing with the doors in the Emperor's chambers, locking him inside rooms for siths and giggles. Minorly inconveniencing the Emperor was ultimately all IG-88 really accomplished while in control of the Death Star. As you all surely know, the Death Star was destroyed in the Battle of Endor, and so was IG-88A. His plans for the droid revolution died with him.
Widely renowned as the best bounty hunter since Jango lost his head, Cad Bane has a particular degree of notoriety due to the manner of his involvement during the Clone Wars. He worked for the Confederacy, for the Hutts, and for mysterious Sith Lords alike, with few limits to speak of and concerned for nothing save himself. Bane is generally seen as an amoral character, more so than some other, more notorious bounty hunters, and for obvious reasons. But though he wasn't nearly as honorable as the Fetts were, for example, Cad Bane wasn't completely amoral, and indeed, he was a rather complex character. In this video, we'll be exploring the true depth of the most infamous childhood. In Star Wars The Clone Wars, the character of Cad Bane seems pretty consistent. He's a brutal, skilled bounty hunter with no concept of empathy or altruism. But there's one moment in the show in particular that seems to break this mold, which many of you likely remember. During the Rako Hardeen arc in Season 4, Bane saves a disguised Obi-Wan Kenobi's life in the box when Morala Uval tried to kill him out of spite. Bane had no reason to do this. Kenobi, even while disguised as Hardeen, was a competitor after all, and yet he did so anyway, because he respected him and because Uval had cheated. To understand this moment, we need to more fully understand Cad Bane, and to do that, we need to take a quick look into his life. He grew up on New Tiana, one of the poorer of Duro's space cities, where he began his career as a hunter by tracking down petty criminals. As soon as he had enough money to leave, he did so, swearing never to return, and set out to become a galactic level hunter. On an early mission, he was hired to protect a client from an alleged Jedi, only to discover that the Jedi was actually using technology to imitate Force powers. After defeating this assassin, Bane spared his life in exchange for the secrets of his technology, which he used to great effect in the years leading up to the Clone Wars. Bane's arsenal, which included rocket boots, breathing tubes hooked up to his windpipe, explosives, and all sorts of gadgets built into his gauntlets, allowed him to hunt down anyone, even Jedi.
This gave him quite the reputation and attracted the attention of the Bounty Hunters Guild, which he refused to join. This brought him into conflict with the guild when he refused to refrain from taking bounties posted by them, leading him into a skirmish with Kradosk, the father of Bosk and the leader of the guild. Bane defeated Kradosk, but yet again he spared him, this time for so-called professional reasons. By 21 BBY, Bane had grown quite notorious, leading Darth Sidious to choose him to fulfill a series of missions intended to hurt the Jedi Order itself. Bane took these missions without hesitation, despite the risk to himself, and though his missions weren't entirely successful, they were nonetheless sufficient to boost him from notoriety to the status of a living legend. During his time under Sidious, Bane expressed levels of skill, intelligence, and ruthlessness that were rarely seen in bounty hunters, giving him a long list of potential clients to choose from. Perhaps one of the best terms to describe Cad Bane is adaptable. He had the rare skill of being able to work with a variety of circumstances and change his plans as those circumstances changed. The Sidious missions showed this well, and he was able to adapt his plans repeatedly during the Battle of Deveron, and he took advantage of Clone Trooper Denal's armor to escape his flagship, a bit of quick thinking that few others would have been able to come up with in time. But the Sidious missions emphasized something else about his character, which you might have missed while watching the episodes. Bane, outwardly, is all about the credits. His standard rate is known to be high, and he makes clear that he'll do anything to get paid if the price is right several times. But despite this, Bane doesn't seem to be all that focused on collecting a high price during his missions for Sidious. Sure, he demands quite a lot, but he does it in a bit of a passive, lazy manner, as you recall, and they generally fade out of focus during that episode arc. One would think that, considering how dangerous these missions would be for Bane, that the big payday at the end of it all would be his focus. Instead, considering that this is Cad Bane's first chronological appearance in the show, it can be inferred that he's doing these hard tasks for another reason as well. To prove to the galaxy that he's the best, and to be recognized for it. Keep that in mind for later. Frequently, Bane worked for the Hutts, most notably during his bid to free Zero the Hutt from Republic custody, as well as for the Confederacy of Independent Systems, which generally didn't care about the records of its agents. But one mission in the latter category is notable in particular: his participation in the plot to kidnap Supreme Chancellor Palpatine at the Festival of Light on Naboo. This is notable because Bane seemed way too invested in that mission than credits alone would dictate. After all, even before he was being paid to lead a team, Bane came up first with the plan and then with several backup plans to get Moralo Ival to Sereno, and he led Ival and who he believed to be Rako Hardin through it. It's a fair assumption that this was because he and Ival were going to the same place in the same manner, and that he was concerned about getting himself to Sereno as well. But this just begs another question. Why was he so dead set on competing in the box? Well, for the same reason that he took Sidious's seemingly suicidal missions. He wanted to prove that he was the best of the best. After the contest in the box, Count Dooku made Bane the leader of his team of bounty hunters, which isn't the first time that Bane was put in charge of a team. Previously, he had operated with two others when breaking into the Jedi Temple under Darth Sidious. And most notably, he assembled a pretty large team of bounty hunters for his assault on the Senate building. Furthermore, as far as leadership skills go, he was pretty great, despite his repeated insistence that he worked best solo. This sort of inherent personality conflict was a very good detail on the part of the writers. Seemingly paradoxical attributes are what makes humans human, and this just serves to make his character more effective. But digressions aside, it does say something important about Bane's character. Alongside splitting credits, Bane's stated reason for not taking partners was that they slowed him down, usually due to lack of skill. It's no coincidence that the teams Bane worked with were all composed from the best of the best. It can be inferred that, in reality, Bane had no problem splitting credits with accomplices that were skilled on a comparable level to himself. Write that one down too. With all that said, we can finally take a crack at why Bane spared Obi-Wan Kenobi in the box. You might have noticed earlier, especially during Bane's early life, that Cad Bane actually spared people rather frequently, more so than many more principled bounty hunters. He spared the man that imitated a Jedi during an early mission after defeating him, he spared Krodosk despite the notoriety that he could have gained from killing the man, and he spared quite a few others in lesser known stories that aren't as worth diving into. And yes, there's a pattern to be observed here. Earlier, we said that Cad Bane was an amoral character, but this isn't entirely the case. Bane's morals were certainly a whole lot more lax than any respectable sentient being, and he showed no qualms with killing unarmed innocents or his prisoners. But he did have his own twisted sense of morality. It was simply different than what decent people would consider morality. Bane's ruthlessness was most frequently expressed towards innocents, those that were unarmed or easily defeated. But he didn't display the same sense of ruthlessness toward others, and for one key reason: he considered them skilled enough to earn his respect. For Cad Bane, skill was what dictated the value of a being. This is why he took on missions that posed a great risk to him. He wanted to prove that he was the most skilled bounty hunter in the galaxy, the best of the best, because that was what meant most to him. Skill is the key to Bane's character. It was the only thing he truly respected, and at heart, it was what he was out to prove that he had. This is pure speculation on our part, don't get us wrong, but it's entirely possible that Bane's devotion to credits was because they served as a tangible indicator of his skill. It's no coincidence that Bane's respect for the disguised Obi-Wan Kenobi started to grow only when Kenobi began to provide useful skills to help him and evolve. And it's no coincidence that Bane saved Kenobi right after Kenobi had proven that he was among the most skilled snipers in the galaxy. It's also no coincidence that Bane made an attack on Moralo Ival's honor after the attempt to kill Kenobi, as Bane clearly considered Kenobi to be vastly more skilled than Ival. He saved Kenobi because he respected him, and he respected him because he believed that he was capable of incredible things, just as he himself strived to be. Now guys, just a little. In the modern era of the Star Wars universe, Boba Fett was considered the best bounty hunter in the business. Before him, Cad Bane held the title, which he took from Jango Fett. The bounty hunter we'll be talking about today was also considered the greatest of his time, but he lived and died long before Cad Bane or the Fetts. He reigned supreme during the Jedi Civil War, killing without hesitation or remorse. He certainly had more kills than any other bounty hunter in his time, and he may well have had the all-time highest kill count of any bounty hunter. His name was Calo Nord, and in this video, we'll be telling his story. Calo Nord, a human male, was sold into slavery at a very young age and spent most of his childhood badly mistreated. The torment Nord received as a child led him to adopt an attitude of ruthlessness and cold-heartedness, virtually becoming a sociopath in the process. At the age of 16, Calo brutally murdered his masters and escaped slavery. He used his newfound freedom to track down and murder his parents as well, causing a bounty to be placed on his head. Calo never looked all that formidable, since he was extremely short, standing at just 1.5 meters in height, probably due to childhood malnourishment. But even at a young age, his looks belied his cunning and skill. As bounty hunters came after him, he took note of their methods, acquiring skills that he would later put to work as a hunter himself. He killed each and every one of the bounty hunters that tracked him down, stealing supplies and equipment from each one. Eventually, the Bounty Hunters Guild determined that the bounty on him was just too dangerous and called it off. But Calo Nord wasn't finished. He tracked down the people who had placed the bounty in the first place and killed them all, then set out to become a bounty hunter himself. Like most bounty hunters, he sold his services to the highest bidder, but he worked mostly for the thrill of the hunt and had a preference for contracts that allowed him to kill. He quickly rose to be considered one of the best in the business, a reputation he earned for his frighteningly high kill count. Like most bounty hunters, Calo Nord used a diverse array of equipment during his hunts. His usual outfit was a bit gaudy and seemingly not all that practical, prominently featuring a set of night vision goggles, a Verpine-made personal energy shield, and a heavy, leather-padded blue jacket, which looked almost comically large on him. This jacket allowed him to conceal a good many weapons, however, with his usual arsenal including a pair of Mandalorian heavy blasters, a vibroblade, a few stun grenades, and a pair of thermal detonators. Nord also owned a suit of heavy armor based on Mandalorian designs, a custom-made set designed by one of the galaxy's best armorers. The designer was murdered by Calo Nord shortly after the suit's completion, a measure taken to ensure it remained unique. Nord's small stature and odd-looking outfit meant that many beings made the foolish mistake of not taking him seriously. This mistake was often fatal, as Calo had no qualms with murdering people just for trying to talk to him. He was known to give others to the count of 3 to leave him alone before he opened fire. This habit, combined with Nord's lethality in his line of work, meant that his kill count was one of the highest of any bounty hunter, if not the all-time highest. Mission Vow once remarked that he'd kill more people than the Iridian Plague. Despite his tendency to commit murder, Calo Nord fulfilled a number of contracts for the Galactic Republic and the local governments of several core worlds in his day. He preferred, however, to work with members of the criminal underworld, as they tended to be much more lenient about him killing his targets. In particular, during the Jedi Civil War, he worked a lot with Davik Kang, a crime lord based on Taris who was a leading member of the Exchange. During the old Sith Wars, the Exchange was one of the most powerful crime syndicates in the galaxy, second only to the Hutt cartel. Though in later years it was overshadowed and effectively replaced by the Black Sun, the Exchange became incredibly powerful during the Mandalorian Wars and wielded considerable influence during the darkest chapters of the old Sith Wars. It dealt in smuggling, the arms trade, the slave trade, the spice trade, and good old-fashioned extortion, and during the Jedi Civil War, Davik Kang was also one of its kingpins. Calo Nord found favour with the Exchange in his work for Davik, allowing him to become more selective with his bounty hunting. Most of Calo's work for Davik was regular bounty hunting fare, but now and again, the crime lord gave him more unusual jobs. He was known to have tracked down and killed a fully grown Rancor for Davik, who wanted a Rancor head for his trophy wall, a task that Calo eagerly accepted as he had a bit of a passion for big game hunting. Nord was also taken on by Davik as a bodyguard at times, a boring but highly profitable task. He was on Taris as Davik's bodyguard when, in 3956 BBY, the Sith seized control of the planet and put it under quarantine, preventing anyone from leaving. While quarantined on Taris, Calo spent his time tracking down small-time bounties and committing a few murders here and there. He sparred a lot with fellow mercenary Canderous Ordo, a Mandalorian who Davik also hired. Shortly before the end of the Sith quarantine, Canderous brought the amnesiac Revan into Davik's estate in order to steal his ship, the Ebon Hawk, and flee Taris. Davik and Calo caught the two and their companions in the act, but were ultimately unable to stop them from escaping. The Sith began shelling the planet during the flight in Davik's hangar, killing Davik and incapacitating Calo. Revan and his companions presumed Calo to be dead and fled as Taris burned. But Calo Nord survived the destruction of Taris. How exactly he escaped the planet is unknown, but he was able to get a good glimpse of Revan and his companions before they escaped in the Ebon Hawk. He recognized one as Bastila Shan, the Jedi the Sith were searching for, and another as Karth Onasi, a legendary Republic war hero. Sensing that the Sith would be interested in this information, he reached out to Admiral Saul Karath of the Sith Empire and arranged a meeting with Darth Malak. Through Calo, Malak learned of Bastila's escape from Taris and that Revan had been with her. Malak was impressed by Nord's survival on Taris and hired him to track down Bastila and Revan. The bounty hunter readily agreed, wanting to protect his reputation and avenge his earlier defeat. After a long hunt, Calo Nord tracked Revan and his companions to the Dune Sea on Tatooine, where they were searching for an ancient star map. On Tatooine, Nord hired a group of mercenaries to accompany him out into the desert and then tracked the Jedi to a remote Krayt dragon lair where the star map was hidden. They set up an ambush outside of the cave, blocking the way back into the desert with their speeders and waiting for the Jedi to emerge. When they did, Revan initially tried to bargain with Calo, but the bounty hunter was unresponsive. He wanted the Jedi dead to protect his reputation and didn't care about the money. A battle broke out, but it didn't end well for Calo. The Jedi and their companions easily dispatched his hired goons, and though he put up quite a fight, Calo Nord eventually fell to Revan's blade. After many long years, one of the galaxy's most prolific killers was defeated, though it took one of the Jedi Order's greatest to finally bring him down. Despite Calo Nord's fearsome reputation during his lifetime, history largely forgot him. The Dark Wars, the era that followed the Jedi Civil War, saw many similarly vicious bounty hunters rise to prominence, and as the exchange rebounded from the loss of Davik, it began to favour them as much as it had favoured Kylo. Nord's own story was ultimately swept up into that of Revan, becoming a footnote in the legend of the Jedi Order's prodigal knight.
The lesson of strength is this: it is not having the strength to kill those you hate, but those you love. Strength is when you crush their lives beneath your hands, murder them to save them from falling into the Shadowlands as you have. So spoke Han-Ha, one of only a handful of Wookiees who left Kashyyyk during the time of the old Sith Wars. His species is one of the most well-known in Star Wars and one of the most well-liked too. The Wookiees are generally known among Star Wars fans as strong and fearsome, but honourable and righteous as well. Something exemplified by Chewbacca, the most famous of their kind. But not every Wookiee was as noble as Chewie. Some were violent, resentful, or even downright vicious. Han-Ha, the Wookiee we'll be talking about today, was all three. What's more, his violence, resentment, and viciousness were directed against a singular target: humanity. From an early age, Han-Ha stood out from the other Wookiees of his tribe. He never truly felt at home among his people. Instead, he constantly felt the call of the Shadowlands, the monster-infested floor of Kashyyyk's planetary jungle. As he grew older, he began to spend ever more time down on the forest floor, hunting and killing without restraint. His tribe became suspicious of him and began to feel he was becoming too vicious and bestial. One day, they refused to allow him back into their village, banishing him to the Shadowlands for good. To understand the significance of this, we need to delve a little into Wookiee beliefs. To the Wookiees, the Shadowlands were more than just the dangerous surface of their world. The Shadowlands represented the brutal, animalistic side of life, a place without mercy, where prey was endlessly sought out and butchered by predators. Wookiees exiled to the Shadowlands were held by their tribes to have become not just animals but vicious creatures of darkness. But Han-Ha's case was different. Even before his exile, he felt the call of the beast and heeded it. Now, in a previous video about the suffering of the Wookiees, we told the story of Kashyyyk and how it was enslaved. In 4020 BBY, shortly before the onset of the old Sith Wars, human representatives of Czerka Corporation first arrived on Kashyyyk. In those days, the Wookiees hadn't yet invented space travel and they knew next to nothing of outside the galaxy. Czerka's scouts saw them as primitive but strong. Czerka legally secured ownership of Kashyyyk and then set out about making the planet profitable by taking Wookiees as slaves. But at first, Czerka didn't make its intentions clear to the Wookiees. They approached them as friends and helpers, gaining the trust of the local tribes and learning their ways. Then, when they deemed their infiltration sufficient, they struck. Czerka began its campaign of enslavement by ambushing Wookiee hunting parties in the Shadowlands and by setting themselves up to save Wookiee lives, following which those Wookiees would owe them life debts. Then they began moving against entire villages in force, enslaving adults and children alike. From the Shadowlands, Han-Ha watched all of this unfold. He and the other Wookiees had initially passed the humans off as weak, believing they were prey and the Wookiees predators, but they had been wrong and the tables had turned. He knew that this tribe, his village, would be the next to fall to the slavers. What he did next is best rendered in his own words. Czerka fell upon my people like Kinrath, quick, deadly, armed with weapons that my people had never seen. I watched, I knew what would happen. Prey is devoured, broken, and my eyes filled with blood, and I knew my people would be sentenced, would become slaves. They would turn into prey forever, hunted but demeaned, not killed. I killed the young ones first. Those were the ones in most danger. Then I moved on to the adults, from the weakest to the strongest as they slumbered. Then when many awoke, I slaughtered them too. With Rick Blade and Bowcaster, they fell. But with every one that fell, I gripped them by the throat and stared into their eyes. I let them see the Shadowlands and all of its darkness. I let them see what their weakness had brought them. Something inside Han-Ha had snapped, or perhaps it had always been snapped and simply chose then to come to the surface. When Czerka slavers discovered Han-Ha standing over the bodies of his tribe, they were furious at him for killing their herd. They shackled him and made him a slave, a fate Han-Ha accepted willingly. The slavers sent him on a ship to Nar Shaddaa, where he was to be sold to the highest bidder.
But during the journey from Kashyyyk to Nar Shaddaa, Hanha broke free and began hunting the slavers. There was nowhere for the humans to run. Over the course of weeks, Hanha hunted them like beasts of the Shadowlands. He picked them off one by one, hiding their bodies in storage containers for those who remained to find, and letting those that had hidden in the air vents starve before he finished them off. On autopilot, the slavers' ship eventually reached and crashed on Nar Shaddaa. When he emerged from the wreckage, Hanha found himself in a forest of metal skyscrapers, which he accepted as his new home. To Hanha, Nar Shaddaa was a lot like Kashyyyk. There, billions of living beings were always competing with each other, often hunting and killing to survive. Where others would see a vast slum, Hanha saw the Shadowlands. Now free, Hanha became a hunter again, but instead of hunting beasts, he hunted humans, though he personally didn't see a difference. As humans had enslaved his people, he now enslaved them, selling families and devastating entire colonies. He brutally tormented his human captives, broke their spirits, and only when they could no longer suffer would he let them die. He sought nothing less than the misery and death of every human in the galaxy. Through it all, Hanha continued to wear the shackles the slavers had put on him back on Kashyyyk all those years ago. Though he had long since broken his chains, he kept the shackles as a reminder of what the humans of Czerka had taught him. From them, he had learned slavery, that the lives of the weak belonged to the strong. With chains, Czerka had made him weak, but after breaking free, he had become strong again, and he swore to teach the other humans the lessons that Czerka had taught him. To again quote the bitter Wookiee, "As humans taught me slavery, I started selling humans. Many at a time, wailing packs of children and their mothers, entire tribes of humans. There's a debt that you humans can never repay me, and that is my life debt, one that humans will pay with their lives." Despite having left Kashyyyk and having killed his entire tribe, Hanha still clung to the Wookiee tradition of the life debt. To him, it was the last thing that kept him connected to his people. The last path to what he called the place beyond the Shadowlands, an afterlife beyond the unending hunt where he could reunite with the Wookiees. He secretly wished they would forgive him for what he had done, and that when he died, they would allow him to be free of the Shadowlands, to be free of the cycle of predator and prey, of weakness and strength. He believed that giving up the life debt would be giving up the last thing that made him a Wookiee. He saw his vendetta against humans as an extension of the life debt concept, as he was teaching to the humans what they had taught to him. It should be mentioned that Hanha didn't just blame humans for enslaving him and the other Wookiees, but also for the death of his tribe. Hanha, of course, was the one who slaughtered his village, but he didn't exactly see those deaths as his fault or even as murder. He believed that, by threatening to enslave his tribe, Czerka was responsible for their deaths. If Hanha hadn't killed them at all, they would have been broken and made into prey, and that was something he saw as worse than murder. In his own words, "They are not dead. Where I sent them, they are free. Even as their screams fell upon me, even as they fell still as I crushed the life from them, I know that they are far from the Shadowlands, in a place where they will never be chained." This was why he hunted, enslaved, and murdered humans. He was avenging his tribe. What's more, he was avenging himself. He had been exiled to the Shadowlands before Czerka came to Kashyyyk, but in his mind, he had still linked to his people in spirit. Hanha saw the massacre of his tribe and his being taken away from Kashyyyk as a more permanent form of exile to the Shadowlands. Until he died, he believed he would have to be like the beasts of Kashyyyk, always hunting, killing, and establishing his dominance. He didn't want that life. After spending decades away from Kashyyyk, he wished to dwell in the Shadowlands no longer. But in life, he could never go back, all because of humans. Hanha had been hunting humans for years when one day he was hired to hunt a young woman named Mira. He trapped her in a network of vents on Nar Shaddaa with mines, but this proved to be a miscalculation. Mira was a demolitions expert, and she crossed the minefield without issue. Hanha chased after her, but Mira scrambled the signals of the mines, causing them to explode when he crossed. Hanha was nearly killed by the blast, and he was at Mira's mercy. He expected her to kill him. More so, he wanted her to kill him, to free him from the Shadowlands, but she didn't. Mira felt pity for him and walked away, letting the Wookiee live. Because of this, Hanha now owed her a life debt, something that made him livid. He had twisted the idea of the life debt in his mind, as his experiences with Czerka had led him to see it as a kind of shackle. He knew the slavers had taken many of his people by setting Wookiees up to make life debts, and he had come to understand the tradition as analogous to slavery. In Han-Ha's mind, Mira, a human he considered weak and undeserving, had done to him what Zerka had done to his people. He refused to serve her, but he refused to abandon the life debt too, as doing so would permanently separate him from his people. Instead, he vowed to repay the debt by killing Mira, as she should have killed him. She had made him a slave, he believed, and to Han-Ha, the only way to escape bondage the second time was to kill her. Mira and Han-Ha were both on Nar Shaddaa in 3951 BBY when Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile, came to the world looking for the last of the Jedi. Mira ended up joining Surik and her comrades while Han-Ha was hired by Visquis, a local Quarren crime boss, to capture Surik. Han-Ha and Visquis set a trap for the exile, but Mira came in her place and Visquis was able to capture her. As a reward for Han-Ha's help, Visquis allowed the Wookiee to face off against Mira in single combat, but Mira got the upper hand in the resultant battle and Han-Ha was badly wounded. All those present presumed him dead, but this wasn't the case. Han-Ha was close to death but not quite dead when Darth Traya found him. Traya revived Han-Ha, much to the Wookiee's fury, for he didn't want another life debt. But Traya promised she wouldn't shame Han-Ha by showing him pity or mercy, as Mira had done, and so Han-Ha reluctantly agreed to do as she asked. She sent him to Malachor 5 to await the coming of the exile and her followers. When they arrived, Han-Ha lay waiting in a ravine to the Trayus Academy, ordered to separate Surik from her companions. He remained in hiding as Surik passed by, but soon enough, one of her companions followed and he leapt out to block their path. In doing so, he discovered that his first opponent was to be none other than Mira. In the depths of Malachor 5, Han-Ha and Mira fought one last battle, but the insane Wookiee was outmatched. Surik had trained Mira as a Jedi Sentinel since they had left Nar Shaddaa, and Mira easily won her final battle with Han-Ha. As Mira went to join Surik at the Trayus Academy, the beaten Han-Ha begged her to kill him. This time, she complied, and Han-Ha was finally freed.
Over the course of galactic history, many droids in the Star Wars universe ended up working as bounty hunters or assassins. Most were built specifically for the task, most notably the infamous IG-88 and our personal favourite droid character, HK-47. But some of these droids were rogues, having been built for more mundane purposes before choosing different, less reputable lives for themselves. The droid we'll be talking about today was one such unit. Originally, he was a simple protocol droid serving aboard a passenger liner. But after reprogramming himself, he took his life in a much different direction. He became a master thief and one of the best bounty hunters in the galaxy. His name was 4-LOM, and in this video, we'll be telling his story. The case is inconclusive, but the processor doesn't appear to be at fault. The subject claims he committed crimes simply for love of money. This passage comes from a report filed by technicians from Industrial Automaton, which had tasked the technicians with determining what turned one of their products into a thief. The company originally feared that 4-LOM had some sort of malfunction, a flawed part or poorly programmed behavior core. But there was nothing wrong with the droid's construction, and his behavior core was stable. Industrial Automaton never figured out why the droid had decided to start a life of crime. As far as they could tell, the droid was just built different. Let's start at the beginning. 4-LOM was a LOM series protocol droid built by Industrial Automaton, and before he was even created, his model had issues. Though LOM series were mostly humanoid, their heads were much more insectoid in appearance, with bulging photoreceptor eyes and proboscis-like vocabulator units. Industrial Automaton gave the droids a more alien appearance in the hopes of increasing sales among non-human species, but the LOM series nonetheless had an incredibly lackluster commercial performance. It didn't help that protocol droids weren't Industrial Automaton's usual market. Cybot Galactica, IA's rival, made most of the galaxy's Class 2 droids, while IA was known more for its astromechs. The LOM series was an attempt to break into a new market, and it failed. The line's problems multiplied when Cybot Galactica accused Industrial Automaton of ripping off its design with the LOM series, as IA's protocol droids incorporated many parts that were virtually identical to Cybot Galactica's. These legal problems made the financial failure of the LOM series even worse, leading Industrial Automaton to sell them for bargain prices. Despite the initial failure of the line, IA held out hope that the droids would sell better with the cheaper price tag. They might have, if it weren't for 4 LOM. Initially no different from any other LOM series protocol droid, 4 LOM first served aboard the Quarry Princess, a high-end passenger liner. He was assigned a great many tasks, acting as a valet, a translator, and a middleman between the passengers and the ship's central computer. 4 LOM was also ordered to keep track of the ship's passengers and their belongings. Many of the Quarry Princess's passengers were extremely wealthy, and items of great value regularly went missing aboard the vessel. When they did, it fell to 4 LOM to find it and return them. 4 LOM didn't find his duties aboard the Quarry Princess very interesting. They lacked challenge, he thought, and he was silently frustrated by the carelessness of the passengers who seemed to lose things the minute he turned around. 4 LOM was far from the only droid in the galaxy to feel resentment about his duties. Due to programming issues, many felt the same way he did. Unlike most droids, however, 4 LOM had the opportunity to do something about his position. As a necessity of his job, 4 LOM had unlimited access to the Quarry Princess's main computer. The computer was highly advanced and possessed artificial sentience and became good friends with 4 LOM. Upon learning of 4 LOM's frustrations with the passengers, it began playing games with the protocol droid to give him a bit of a challenge. 4 LOM reasoned that, since it was his job to prevent items from being stolen, he should be analyzing what items came aboard the ship, how valuable they were, and how they might be stolen so as to anticipate the actions of would-be thieves. To keep themselves amused, 4 LOM and the mainframe talked out these scenarios when they weren't otherwise occupied. But as time went on, something curious began to happen. The two began to alter each other's programming. Most droids were unable to alter their programming for obvious reasons, but droids could alter each other's programming, a loophole that 4 LOM exploited. On his request, the Quarry Princess disabled most of 4 LOM's programming limitations, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. 4 LOM decided that he'd had enough of the passengers' carelessness. If they weren't able to keep track of their valuables, he reasoned, they didn't deserve to. His games with the mainframe became reality. One day, Dom Plesina, an incredibly wealthy woman, came aboard the Quarry Princess, bringing with her the Ankara Sapphire, one of the most valuable gems in the galaxy. Dom Plesina soon proved to be the most careless meatbag in the galaxy, leaving priceless jewelry lying around the ship for 4 LOM to retrieve. The droid decided that the sapphire was too valuable to belong to such an incompetent being, and predicted that someone would try to steal it before Plesina left the ship. He was correct. 2 of the vessel's other passengers were thieves themselves, and they had their eyes set on the sapphire. But 4 LOM beat them to the punch. He had the sapphire swapped out for a fake embedded with a tracking device, and allowed the thieves to steal that instead. The tracking device got the thieves caught, and 4 LOM returned the false gem to Plesina, keeping the real one for himself. Plesina eventually realized that the returned sapphire was a fake and frantically searched for the real gem, but it was never found. Nobody suspected that a droid might be the thief, and 4 LOM kept the real gem. After stealing the sapphire, 4 LOM began robbing the passengers blind, stealing valuables from dozens of wealthy travelers. Before long, however, robbing random rich idiots became a bit boring. Wanting a greater challenge, 4 LOM left the Quarry Princess when it stopped at Darlin Boda, abandoning his post without explanation. After selling his stolen goods on Darlin Boda, 4 LOM began traveling the galaxy, stealing as he went. With his ill-earned credits, he got himself a ship, an arsenal of blaster rifles, and numerous droid upgrades. Eventually, he became known as a master thief and legendary information broker, causing Industrial Automaton yet another scandal that buried the already failing LOM series. In those days, 4 LOM was still unable to hurt anyone. His programming prevented him from doing so. However, his skill at thievery and his incredible intelligence made him one of the most effective criminals in the galaxy. 4-LOM's fame grew to the point that, one day, he was approached by representatives of Jabba the Hutt who wanted to hire the droid to become a bounty hunter. In exchange, Jabba offered to further modify 4-LOM's programming to allow him to use violence. 4-LOM agreed. 4-LOM quickly became one of the most effective bounty hunters in the galaxy, earning a great deal of credits in the process. However, 4-LOM was never really in it for the money. He broke the law for fun. The one thing he desired above all were challenges to overcome, and his life of crime proved quite satisfying. This wasn't the only respect in which 4-LOM was an unusual bounty hunter either. Despite his droid nature, 4-LOM was secretly much more compassionate than the vast majority of his colleagues. He had little regard for the stupid, especially the stupid and rich, but he could be unusually kind to those he saw as deserving. On Darlin Boda, for example, 4-LOM gave the Ankara sapphire to an old woman who worked as a pawnbroker, ordering her to sell the gem and hold the proceeds for him. When 4-LOM returned, however, he let the old woman keep the money, which he never really wanted anyway. Jabba often paired 4-LOM up with other bounty hunters, using the droid's intelligence to complement the abilities of others. In particular, he started pairing 4-LOM up with Zuckuss, a Gand bounty hunter known as the Uncanny One among his colleagues. As a Gand, Zuckuss was an ammonia breather, requiring him to wear a full environmental suit at all times. But Zuckuss was no ordinary Gand, he was a Gand Findsman. Findsmen were Gand with a special sort of sensitivity to the Force, which gave them incredible intuition and allowed them to track down targets. This, naturally, made Zuckuss a great bounty hunter. Many bounty hunters were hesitant to work with Zuckuss as they were creeped out by his alienness and uncanny abilities. But 4-LOM had no problem working with the Gand. Indeed, he became quite fascinated with him. Though 4-LOM was incredibly intelligent, he just didn't have the intuition Zuckuss did. He wanted to learn how to feel Zuckuss's intuition and ended up agreeing to a long-term partnership. 4-LOM really came into his own during his partnership with Zuckuss. The two made a deadly team, bringing in many bounties over the years. They took many contracts from Jabba the Hutt, but they also had other clients, among them Taggy Ko and the Galactic Empire. During the Galactic Civil War, the two were among the bounty hunters hired by Darth Vader to find Han Solo, though they actually defected to the Rebel Alliance not long afterward. In time, 4-LOM and Zuckuss became friends as well as partners. 4-LOM studied Zuckuss when he meditated and eventually learned to meditate himself. Once he did, he began desiring to learn the ways of the Force. The two hunters looked after each other, sometimes even letting targets escape to keep each other out of harm's way. Whenever 4-LOM was damaged, Zuckuss would repair him, and when Zuckuss's lungs were injured during one mission, 4-LOM set out to raise enough credits to buy him cloned replacements. 4-LOM was a walking paradox. He was a protocol droid who preferred to stay silent, an enthusiastic criminal with plenty of compassion, and a logic-driven droid who dreamed of learning the ways of the Force. Above all, however, he was whoever he wanted to be. 4-LOM decided his own destiny, his own goals, and his own values. No one, not his programmers at Industrial Automaton, nor the laws of the Empire, could make him anything else.
The Mandalorians were some of the most feared beings in the galaxy. Over the millennia, their numbers included unstoppable conquerors, insurmountable warriors, and brilliant tacticians. But who was the greatest Mandalorian of all? Was it Mandalore the Ultimate, their most prolific conqueror? What about Jango Fett or Boba Fett? All three were certainly up there as far as great Mandalorians went, but Canderous Ordo overshadowed all of them. Canderous, or Mandalore the Preserver as he was later known, was a man of unrivaled badassery, and in this video we'll be telling his story. Canderous Ordo was a member of Clan Ordo, one of the oldest human-dominated Mandalorian clans. He was raised in the Mandalorian ways on his clan's homeworld, a desert planet in Mandalorian space named Ordo, and he came of age shortly after the end of the Great Sith War, 3,996 years before the Battle of Yavin. At the time, the Mandalorians were in the middle of a massive cultural shift. After the defeat of the Mandalorian Crusades in the Great Sith War, Mandalore the Ultimate had reorganized the Mandalorians into the Neo Crusaders. The Neo Crusaders abandoned the nomadic ways of their predecessors in favor of acting as a conventional, highly organized military force, though they still held true to Mandalorian warrior traditions. They built up a mighty war machine and actively recruited from a variety of species, hoping to recover from the casualties sustained in the Great Sith War. In those, the Neo Crusaders had yet to challenge the Republic, instead focusing on conquering small worlds in the Outer Rim. During one such conquest, Canderous was tasked with leading the offensive as part of a rite of passage. He was just 13 at the time, the age at which younglings became adults in Mandalorian tradition. Despite his young age, he armored up, strapped himself onto a basilisk war droid, and dropped onto a target planet from orbit, the vanguard of the Mandalorian assault force falling behind him. It was young Canderous who fired the first shots of the battle, scattering the planet's defenders and destroying their main power generator. Canderous was held in high esteem by the other Mandalorians for the honor and skill he displayed in that battle. He rose quickly through the ranks of the Mandalorian, becoming a legend among his clan for his skill with heavy weapons and basilisk war droids. Mandalore himself took notice of young Canderous, whom he made a rally master in the Neo Crusader army, essentially equivalent to a commander. Canderous fought in many battles during the early years of the Mandalorian Wars, vanquishing the armies of countless remote Outer Rim worlds. After about a decade of service, Canderous finally got a chance to test himself against a more formidable foe, the Republic military. As the Mandalorian Wars escalated into a galactic-scale conflict, Canderous fought on the front lines in some of the first battles against the Republic. In the first Battle of Altair, Canderous's clever tactics allowed the Mandalorians to destroy an enemy fleet 10 times the size of their own. Following this, he became one of Clan Ordo's field marshals. He continued to annihilate enemy forces on world after world, bringing the Republic to its knees. By 3962 BBY, it seemed the Republic would soon fall. Unfortunately for the Mandalorians, however, it was around that time that Revan got involved. That year, a band of Jedi Knights led by Revan and Malak took command of the Republic military. Revan's tactical genius was unrivaled, and despite the best efforts of Canderous and his fellow Mandalorians, Revan was able to turn the tide of the war. By 3960 BBY, the Mandalorians were all but defeated, just 2 years after they seemed poised to conquer the core worlds themselves. The last remnants of the Mandalorian fleet rallied at Malachor 5 for a final battle with Revan's forces. Canderous and the rest of Clan Ordo were among them. They fought well, but in the end, the Mandalorians lost that last battle. During the Battle of Malachor 5, Mandalore the Ultimate was killed and most of the Mandalorians were wiped out. Those who survived had no choice but to unconditionally surrender to Revan and the Republic. Revan forced the Mandalorians to destroy their ships, their war droids, and their armor. He also took away the Mask of Mandalore, preventing them from choosing a new leader. Without the mask, the Mandalorians, already dishonored and defeated, turned on each other, wasting what remained of their strength in a battle over leadership. Disgusted with what had become of his people, Canderous broke with Clan Ordo and the other Mandalorians, not wanting to take part in their vain squabbles. Stripped of his armor, his honor, and his clan, he wandered the galaxy, working as a mercenary and putting his combat skills to use for crime lords. Shortly after the Mandalorian Wars ended, a new war began, the Jedi Civil War. Revan and Malak had become Sith, and now they made war on the Republic, just as the Mandalorians had before them. But Canderous didn't pay much attention to the fortunes of the greater galaxy, caring nothing for the Republic or the Sith. However, while Canderous was working for the crime lord Davik on Taris in 3956 BBY, he ended up getting dragged into the war anyway. By that point, Revan had supposedly been slain by the Jedi and Malak had taken command of the Sith. That year, Malak and the Sith blockaded Taris, imposing a quarantine to prevent the inhabitants from leaving while they searched for the Jedi Knight Bastila Shen. During the quarantine, Canderous became tired of working for Davik and developed a plan to steal Davik's ship, the Ebon Hawk, and run the blockade. To do this, he allied with none other than Bastila herself, as well as Republic veteran Carth Onasi and a few of Bastila's other comrades. Unbeknownst to Canderous, one of Bastila's companions was Revan, whose personality had been wiped and replaced with the personality loyal to the Jedi. Together, Canderous, Revan, Carth, and Bastila managed to steal the Ebon Hawk and escape Taris. From there, they travelled to Dantooine so Revan could retrain as a Jedi, following which the crew of the Ebon Hawk set off on a vital quest for the Republic. Hoping to uncover the secrets of Malak's superweapon, the Starforge, the crew of the Ebon Hawk travelled across the galaxy looking for star maps, vital clues to the weapon's location. Along the way, Canderous found a purpose in life again, fighting for a cause with meaning for the first time in years. Canderous Ordo was one of the most devastating combatants on Revan's team, capable of matching even Sith apprentices in combat. No matter whether he was fighting with his iconic heavy repeating blaster or with vibro swords, he kicked ass everywhere he went. He became close allies with Revan and some of the other members of the Ebon Hawk crew, who valued the Mandalorian's skill enough to overlook his lust for combat. After Revan's true identity was revealed, Canderous pledged his services to the former Dark Lord, believing Revan to be the greatest warrior in the galaxy and a man worth following. He fought alongside Revan to the very end of the Jedi Civil War. After the war's end, Revan's erased memories began to return. He remembered that there was a grave threat lurking beyond the Outer Rim, one he believed he had to go and fight. Before he left, Revan led Canderous to the site where he had hidden the Mask of Mandalore. On the way, he told Canderous a terrible truth he had learned after the Mandalorian Wars. Revan gave Canderous the Mask of Mandalore, anointing him the new leader of the Mandalorians. Canderous took the name Mandalore the Preserver. Revan urged him to rebuild the armies of the Mandalorians and make them ready for the war that was to come, a war in which they would have to fight alongside the Republic to save the galaxy. Mandalore had his work cut out for him. The Mandalorians in those days were still scattered from their defeats a decade earlier. Many had abandoned the clans and become mercenaries or worse. But Mandalore wasn't one down to back down from a challenge. Beginning with Clan Ordo, he gathered the clans on Duxon, Onderon's Demon Moon, where they secretly rebuilt an old Mandalorian stronghold. After gathering what remained of the clans, Mandalore set out to bring other Mandalorians back into the fold, traveling to scum dens across the galaxy to give his fallen brethren a purpose again. Mandalore faced many leadership challenges during this period, but he overcame them all, slaying any who challenged his right to rule the Mandalorians. He quickly gained the admiration of his followers, who grew rapidly in number. Mandalore kept his forces hidden on Duxon, but eagerly awaited the day when they would go to war once more. In 3951 BBY, as the Republic verged on collapse thanks to the work of the Sith Triumvirate, Mandalore met Meetra Surik, the Jedi exile, who came to Duxon aboard the Ebon Hawk. Surik was hunting down the last of the Jedi Masters, hoping they would help her stop the Sith, and asked Mandalore for assistance in finding Master Kavar, who was hiding out on Onderon. After Surik lended a helping hand to the Mandalorians on Duxon, Mandalore gave her a ride to Onderon. They were unsuccessful in recruiting Kavar due to the outbreak of a civil war on the planet, but Mandalore remained with Surik, opting again to join the crew of the Ebon Hawk. Mandalore accompanied Surik and her companions on their quest, recruiting several small bands of Mandalorians along the way. After Surik returned to Onderon, ended the civil war, and finally met with Kavar, Mandalore returned to his people, but only for a little while. After Surik gathered the Jedi Masters, Telos IV came under attack from Darth Nihilus and his fleet of ghost ships. Nihilus planned to consume all life on the planet to sustain his fearsome power, and the planet's defenders were unable to hold him off. Surik went to help defend Telos, and the Mandalorians followed her. Though he wasn't yet willing to reveal himself to the Republic, Mandalore covertly joined the Battle of Telos IV with a team of his best warriors. Together with Meetra Surik and former Sith assassin Visas Ma, Mandalore and his men stormed Nihilus's flagship, the Ravager, a ship that had been wrecked at Malachor V. While Mandalore's warriors planted charges to destroy the ship and held off Nihilus's troops, Mandalore, Surik, and Visas cut their way through to the Ravager's bridge. There, the three of them faced off against Darth Nihilus. Darth Nihilus was a Sith Lord of unfathomable power, but he was no match for Meetra Surik, Visas Ma, and Mandalore the Preserver. Surik carried a wound in the Force within her that weakened Nihilus as he tried to feed on it. while Visas had a force bond with the Sith Lord that she was able to exploit. Mandalore didn't have any Jedi tricks up his sleeve, but he was still able to stand up to Nihilus and help make the Sith Lord look like a pushover. After Nihilus was slain, Mandalore returned to the Mandalorian shuttle, dragging his massive Beskar balls behind him, and gave the order to blow the Ravager to hell. Telos 4 was saved, and unbeknownst to the Republic, Mandalore played a major role in its salvation. Mandalore returned to his people after that, continuing his quest to make them strong again. He ultimately died before the war Revan predicted came to pass, but the Mask of Mandalore was taken up by a new warrior after him, and his people lived on. The Mandalorians reclaimed much of their former glory, and in the later wars, they battled the Sith on the side of the Republic, just as Revan hoped they would. They owed it all to Mandalore the Preserver, the warrior who brought them back from death, the greatest Mandalorian the galaxy had ever known. We would argue that Mandalore the Preserver single-handedly redefined the word badass. No one before or since ever came close to the sheer level of cool this absolute king attained. In all honesty, we should have featured him on our sister channel, The Braved. Durge is perhaps the single most underrated Clone Wars era character. Among the Confederacy's most fearsome commanders, Durge was one of several bounty hunters paid by Dooku to serve as a military leader in the conflict. Durge served the Confederacy far more loyally and for far longer than any of these other hunters, however. This is because he actually had a motivation for fighting the Republic besides money. As a matter of fact, Durge joined the Confederate military because he wanted to kill the Republic's clone troopers. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at why. Durge was born about 2,000 years before the start of the Clone Wars, long before even Yoda. He was a Jedi, a member of an elusive but incredibly unique species that, by and large, kept to itself. Jedi were essentially formless, walking masses of corded muscle and nerve clusters, with their only real distinguishing feature being their heads. They lacked hearts, lungs, and any other vulnerable organs, and they featured highly decentralized circulatory and nervous systems. As Durge himself put it, he was a walking nerve cluster, capable of feeling a human heartbeat from 200 meters away, with near instantaneous reflexes, incredible strength, and insane regenerative capabilities. The nature of their biology meant that Jedi were virtually impossible to kill and difficult to seriously wound. They could regrow lost limbs in minutes and were able to recover from anything short of being hurled into a star, as we'll see later. Fortunately for the galaxy, the Jedi were mostly pacifists. They believed change was an illusion, and their philosophers preached that taking an active role in anything was pointless, if not destructive in itself. This philosophy, which they called the perfection of permanence, meant that the Jedi never involved themselves as a species in galactic affairs, and only a few aberrant members of the species became known to the galaxy, Durge being one of them. Since these outcasts were often uncharacteristically brutal for Jedi, they gave the whole species a bad name that wasn't really all that deserved. There was a dark side to the Jedi, however. If their nervous systems were forced to regenerate too much, as often happened for older members of the species, their mental states would decay. Jedi that regularly got themselves wounded would start to develop psychosis, making them incredibly violent and unpredictable. This eventually happened to most Jedi over time, but it happened much faster for those who were already aggressive. This meant that killers among the Jedi quickly became incredibly unstable, which made them all the more dangerous. Durge was one such Jedi. He was one of the few among his species who was naturally aggressive, and so at an early age, he left his home to become a bounty hunter. Around 1,500 years before the Battle of Yavin, he teamed up with a man named Jang, an ex-Mandalorian trainer that he became good friends with. One day, Durge and Jang were approached by a doctor who promised to cybernetically enhance them, allowing them to become more effective hunters. The two men agreed, and the enhancements were successful. Durge's already formidable Jedi physique was made even more powerful with the cybernetic integration of an armor suit, which served to both aid and protect him in combat. Durge's new cybernetics were quickly put to the test when a band of Mandalorians attacked the Doctor's lab, seeking to steal a Sith artifact the Doctor had in his possession. In the resultant skirmish, Jang was killed. Durge was already mentally unstable from centuries of bounty hunting at that point, and Jang's death pushed him over the edge into psychosis. he killed all the Mandalorians present, vowing he would repay them for Jang's death by killing the reigning Mandalore. At that point in time, the new Sith Wars were in full swing. This was the last of the great clashes between the Jedi Order and their ancient enemies, who at that time were operating under the banner of the new Sith. During the new Sith Wars, the Mandalorians were actually allied with the Jedi. In fact, during the Battle of Maltrove 4, the Mandalorians were actually instrumental in helping the Jedi win the day, saving the Republic in the process. Out of hatred for the Mandalorians, Durge decided to join the war and fight for the Sith. The new Sith were a very incoherent order, more akin to an alliance of small cults than an empire. The fortunes of the various new Sith factions changed rapidly during the war, and as such, Durge didn't develop an allegiance to any of them. He focused less on supporting the Sith and more on fighting their enemies, namely Mandalorians and Jedi. His hatred for Mandalorians only deepened during the 5 centuries he spent fighting for the Sith, and he quickly learned to hate the Jedi too. He became a prolific Jedi hunter, familiar with their techniques and the best ways to kill them. The new Sith Wars ended with a Jedi victory at the 7th Battle of Ruusan, and for fear of reprisals, Durge went into hiding after the war's end. He continued to hunt under false names, earning the ire of the blood boilers of Grudges, among others. He also continued to pursue his vendetta against the Mandalorians. By that point, he had sworn to wipe out the Mandalorians entirely. In 132 BBY, he hunted down and killed the reigning Mandalore, but was subsequently captured by the Mandalorians. They tortured him into insanity, immolated him, and then buried him alive. Durge survived his treatment at the hands of the Mandalorians, but his injuries were so severe that it took him over a century to regenerate fully. He finally clawed his way back out of the ground shortly after the outbreak of the Clone Wars, eager to take his revenge and finally wipe out the Mandalorians. But there was one small problem with that. As far as the galaxy knew, the Mandalorians, or at least the warrior clans, had already been wiped out. Jango Fett, the last of them, had died in the Battle of Geonosis, cheating Durge out of his revenge. By that point, Durge was very, very insane, and upon learning of Fett's death, he became furious too. But once he learned about what was happening in the galaxy at large, he settled on an alternative means of getting revenge on the Mandalorians. Jango Fett may have been dead, but there were millions of clones of him out in the galaxy, fighting for the Republic in the Clone Wars. Durge resolved to kill as many of them as possible. In his own words, Jango Fett was lucky I was taking a nap. Now I'll just have to kill all his spawn. Shortly after his return, Durge met with Count Dooku and accepted a commission as a CIS commander. Despite his insanity, Durge proved incredibly skilled both as a warrior and as a tactician, which led to him becoming one of Dooku's favoured commanders. He often worked alongside Asajj Ventress, whose precise assassin's tactics were a good match for his strength-focused approach to combat. He took to the battlefield with glee, always eager to kill more clones and Jedi, as exemplified by his quip at the start of the Battle of Omadun. You know, it's been over a century since I've killed the Jedi, and today I get to kill 4 of you. Add that to the Gungans I already murdered, the hostages I'm going to kill later, and all the Naboo who will die tomorrow. It's a damn good week. Durge signed up with the Confederacy to kill clones, and he certainly achieved this. In his first appearance on Omadun, he killed whole squads of them, not to mention the entire colony's worth of Gungans he had slaughtered beforehand. He took out his fair share of Jedi too. In a subsequent clash with a Jedi strike team of G.O.A.T, he killed Nol Venari and John Antilles, legendary nomadic Jedi who are among the greatest warriors of the Order. Perhaps Durge's most well-known appearance was during the Battle of Munilinst. Dooku sent Durge to the planet in the event that the battle turned against the Confederacy, and when it did, Durge led a battalion of Lancer droids out from the command center in a massive counterattack. He and his droids cut a bloody swath through the advancing clone army, destroying the Republic's artillery and potentially killing thousands of clones. Durge's counterattack was only stopped by General Kenobi and the Lancer battalion, who defeated Durge's droids and eventually Durge himself. Dooku deployed Durge on more covert missions too. After Munilinst, he and Asajj Ventress were sent on a mission to Trenchant Space Station. Unbeknownst to them, it was a test to see whether General Grievous was skilled enough to become the CIS Supreme Commander. Grievous passed the test, beating both Durge and Ventress so badly that they required time and bacta tanks to recover. Durge was also responsible for orchestrating a prison riot as a bid to lure in Jedi, whom he then killed. Durge's battlefield career is mostly unknown. After the Battle of Muniland, he wasn't involved in any recorded battles, despite it being established that he was active on the front lines for over 2 years afterwards. He was apparently very capable as a commander, so much so that, by the time of the Outer Rim sieges, he was second to only General Grievous himself in terms of the Confederacy's leading officers. Asajj Ventress continued to fight alongside him during this period. It's presumed he killed more than his fair share of clones during this time, and he likely led his armies from the front to allow him to rack up the kills more easily. Contrary to what you might expect, he had nothing to do with Operation Durge's Lance, General Grievous's assault on the core worlds. Durge was finally defeated shortly before the start of the Outer Rim sieges, during a skirmish above Karthak. His mission there was simple. He was to lure Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker into a trap and kill them. Unfortunately for him, one didn't simply kill those legendary Republic heroes, and the Jedi got the upper hand in the ensuing battle. Earlier in the war, Durge might have had more of a chance, but by late 20 BBY, his cognitive state had deteriorated significantly due to repeated injury, and it was beginning to affect his performance. Anakin Skywalker was ultimately able to cripple Durge with explosives, hurl him into an escape pod with the Force, and launch the pod into the nearest star. Durge, the Confederacy's unkillable commander, was vaporized by the ensuing collision and finally died. Death Watch was one of the most memorable third-party factions that appeared in Star Wars The Clone Wars. A faction of Mandalorians that wanted to return Mandalore to its warrior roots, they were a staple of the show right up until the end. But Dave Filoni and the writers of The Clone Wars weren't the first ones to come up with the Death Watch. The Mandalorian terrorist group had appeared previously in the expanded universe, in which they were the rivals of the True Mandalorians, another faction that came to be led by Jango Fett. In this video, we'll be diving into the untold story of the Death Watch and why Jango Fett hated their guts. In 58 BBY, an 8-year-old boy living on Concord Dawn watched a band of dark armored men storm his family's farm. The night before, they had taken in a small band of Mandalorians, which proved to be a fatal mistake. As the young boy watched, the men in dark armor slaughtered his entire family and set their farm ablaze. He was only saved from an untimely death by the very Mandalorians his family had died protecting. That young boy's name was Jango Fett, and just like that, he had gotten himself mixed up in the Mandalorian Civil War. That deadly conflict had its roots in an earlier war, the Mandalorian Excision of 738 BBY. In that conflict, the Republic Judicial Forces, under the leadership of the Jedi Order, launched a preemptive strike on the Mandalorians, who they believed were preparing for yet another crusade. In a decisively brutal assault, the Republic bombarded whole regions of Mandalore and a number of other Mandalorian worlds until they were deserts of white sand, breaking the back of the rising Mandalorian threat in the process. In the aftermath of the conflict, a pacifist faction called the New Mandalorians built a new civilization out in the wastelands, rejecting the warrior codes and making peace with the Republic. Nominally, they took control of Mandalorian space, but contrary to what they liked to claim, their rise wasn't the end of the warrior clans. The Mandalorians of the countryside and the more distant Mandalorian worlds quietly continued living as they had lived for millennia, keeping the traditions of the Mando'ada alive. They called themselves Akalit, or the Faithful, to contrast with the faithless New Mandalorian. As they had before the Excision, the Mandalorians would continue to wear their traditional Beskar armor, and they would continue to be led by the greatest warrior among them, who would claim the title of Mandalore. But nonetheless, the warriors were diminished in numbers and strength by the rise of the New Mandalorians, and over the years, they would become diminished in reputation as well. Some started to see the Akalit as little more than thugs, and the Mandalorians themselves didn't do much to change such views. Perhaps the most notorious example of Mandalorian thuggery during this period was the Ithilin genocide, in which the Akalit wiped out an entire planet over a dispute over booze. Many Akalit called for change, disillusioned with how the Mandalorians had degenerated. In 60 BBY, when an ex-journeyman protector named Jaster Mareel became Mandalore, he heeded these calls and authored a Super Commando Codex, a modern interpretation of the warrior codes of old. Muriel called for the Acolyte to live as honorable mercenaries instead of thugs, and took inspiration from the ancient canons of honor the Mandalorians had followed during the time of the Tongs. But some rejected Muriel's call for reform. Disgusted by what he viewed as weakness in the ranks of the Acolyte, a man named Tor Vizsla broke off and formed the Death Watch. The Death Watch vowed not to reform the Mandalorians, but to return them to glory, and eventually to attempt once more to conquer the entire galaxy. Vizsla and the Death Watch attempted to stage a coup against Muriel and his followers, who declared themselves the true Mandalorians, thus beginning the Mandalorian Civil War. 2 years after the start of the conflict, it made its way to Concord Dawn, where it upended young Jango Fett's life. The Mandalorians the Fetts had taken in were none other than Jaster Muriel and his closest allies, who the Death Watch believed had burned with the farm. They moved into a nearby town to celebrate with a raid, but they were ambushed by the true Mandalorians, who were far from dead. During the battle, Jango was able to kill the man who had murdered his parents, proving himself a capable fighter despite his young age. That battle all but wiped out the Death Watch, and for the next few years, Tor Vizsla was forced to take to the shadows. The seemingly triumphant Muriel adopted Jango as his son and heir following the battle, and over the course of the next 6 years, Fett would become a promising young Mandalorian. After Concord Dawn, the Death Watch became far more subtle, opting to use trickery instead of brute force to fight their true Mandalorian rivals. In 52 BBY, they lured Muriel and his men to Quarter 6 by blackmailing the local government. The Cordons hired the true Mandalorians to deal with a local insurrection, but the insurrectionary force turned out to be larger and stronger than the Mandalorians had been told. Muriel ordered a retreat, but at that moment, Vizsla and the Death Watch executed an ambush. True Mandalorian forces were split in the chaos. A group under Jango Fett and his friend Silas were pinned down, while elsewhere, Jaster Muriel and his second-in-command, Montross, fought back against Vizsla's vanguard. Muriel was wounded by a grenade blast, which Montross avoided with his jetpack, but when the injured Mandalore called to Montross for help, Montross abandoned him, wishing to claim Muriel's title for himself. Jaster Muriel was killed by fire from Tor Vizsla's tank, and the true Mandalorians were forced to retreat and regroup. During the retreat, Fett broke off to retrieve Jaster's body, and Montross used his absence to claim that he, too, had been killed by Vizsla. But as Montross tried to claim the title of Mandalore, Jango showed up with Jaster's corpse and revealed how Montross had abandoned his leader. The true Mandalorians sided with Fett over Montross, exiling him and declaring Jango the new Mandalore. Jango rallied the true Mandalorians and launched a new campaign against the Death Watch, who had once more taken his family from him. Over the course of the next few years, the Death Watch was crippled once again, and once more it went into hiding. By 44 BBY, the true Mandalorians once more seemed to be victorious, and they thrived under the leadership of Jango Fett. But Tor Vizsla wasn't ready to call it quits yet. He made an alliance with the governor of Galadran, the planet on which the last of the Death Watch had hidden, and once the Death Watch had recovered, they once more sprang a trap for the true Mandalorians. The governor hired Jango and his men to put down a local insurrection, which the true Mandalorians were able to do in short order. But as they did so, the governor contacted the Jedi Council, claiming that the Mandalorians were instead murdering political activists and civilians. The council dispatched Jedi Master Dooku and a strike force of Jedi to Galadran in response. Upon their arrival, the Jedi took the governor on his word and ordered the true Mandalorians to surrender or die. Fett and his men refused to submit to arrest, and the disastrous Battle of Galadran ensued. The true Mandalorian slew many Jedi that day. Jango Fett killed several with his bare hands near the end of the battle, but the Jedi were simply stronger and the Mandalorians were overcome. At the end of the battle, only 2 of the true Mandalorians were left alive, Jango Fett and Silas. Fett was captured by Dooku and delivered to the governor of Galadran, who stole his armor and sold him into slavery. The Death Watch was victorious. Jango Fett spent 2 years as a slave aboard a spice transport before he was able to escape. When he did, he went right back to Galadran, where he reclaimed his armor and beat the governor into telling him where Vizsla had gone. With a score to settle, Jango pursued Vizsla's ship, the Death Rattle, to Corellia, where he rammed his ship into Vizsla's engines, boarded the vessel through the bridge viewports, and fought the leader of the Death Watch all the way to the escape pods. As the Death Rattle went down, the 2 ejected from the craft, landing in the Corellian wilderness. There, the battle continued. During the fight, Vizsla managed to inject Fett with a poison that slowed his reflexes, thus gaining the upper hand. But even as he went down, Jango slashed open Vizsla's stomach with blades fired from his gauntlet. The smell of blood promptly attracted a pack of Corellian dire cats who mauled the Death Watch leader, killing him even as Fett lapsed into unconsciousness. Tor Vizsla was dead, and Fett recovered a short while later, having at last avenged his friends and mentor. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. As far as he knew, Jango Fett was the last of the true Mandalorians. He would spend the next decade wandering the galaxy as a bounty hunter, distraught over his failure to protect the only family he had. The Death Watch scattered after the death of their leader. Many of them were killed when the death rattle went down, including almost all of their leaders. In time, they would regroup under Pre Vizsla, who was presumably Tor's son, on Concordia, but it would be 2 decades before they revealed themselves again. While Jango Fett lived, none among the Death Watch dared to show themselves, for fear of Jango's wrath.